Chapter 553. Even if Wulan State and even Reki City disappeared from the world a long time later, the scene in the Hero Square on the afternoon of August 23rd would leave its own color in the long history of the flow of time. The colorful light surged wantonly, almost covering the entire square. The rainbow connecting the heaven and the earth bloomed in Li Tianlan's hands. At this moment, his whole body was shining. This was a miracle. It would also become a legend in the future. Everyone was staring at this scene in a daze. The light that covered the heavy rain was extremely gorgeous, mysterious, and full of sharp majesty. No one could explain such a scene. Because of the unknown, everyone was in awe. Was it a blessing from heaven? Was it destiny? Was it destiny? This scene, which was filled with a mysterious flavor, filled everyone's heart. Apart from shock, it brought them more shock. Wang Tianzong did not look at the rainbow in Li Tianlan's hands. His body turned slowly, and he stared intently in all directions. Naturally, he would not think that these lights were a gift from heaven. The light was still sharp in the slight flow. All the light was sword light. The sword light was sharp but did not hurt people. It silently spread all over the square. This was not something that a human could do at all. Wang Tianzong was sure of this. He could not do it himself, and no one could do it. Everything in front of him was like the light of a sword itself. If such a sword existed, what kind of sword would it be? Wang Tianzong frowned. The sword light kept lingering in his sight. He seemed to detect a familiar taste, but it was hard to describe. He glanced at the snow dance core around him. The snow dance core was silent. Everyone was looking at Li Tianlan quietly. At this moment, there was no one in their eyes, not even the sword light. From Wang Tianzong's sight, the eyes of the snow dance core were all without the slightest rational fanaticism and firmness. Wang Tianzong's heart sank. In the end, he remained silent. At the same time, Wang Tianzong was silent, but Gu Xingyun, who was far away in Zhongzhou State, could not help bursting out. Preposterous! Simply preposterous! What's the meaning of this? Li Tianlan is the commander of the Snow Dance Corps and the marshal of Zhongzhou State. The Snow Dance Corps is the elite corps of Zhongzhou State, not the private army of the Li family. Why does he kneel? Why does he kneel? Was he qualified? Buying people's hearts, building up troops in Eastern Europe, and having wild ambitions, you should be punished. In the cold and spacious hall of Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun looked at the picture on TV and roared hysterically. His eyes were scarlet, and he stared at Li Tianlan as if he wanted to swallow him alive. To win people's hearts, that bitch Qin Weibai is helping him behind the scenes. If he kneels down together with her, it's impossible for us to fight for the Snow Dance Corps. Gu Qianchuan stood beside Gu Xingyun with a pale face and said in a gloomy tone. After he escaped from Beijiang, he did not return to Kunlun City until yesterday. After the battle with Li Tianlan, the injuries he had suppressed relapsed in Beijiang. Now, Gu Qianchuan was not even as good as Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun stared at the TV and was silent. Li Tianlan's kneeling was completely inappropriate. Through the TV, Gu Xingyun didn't know what Li Tianlan said, but no matter what he said, his kneeling seemed to have ulterior motives in the eyes of others. However, the colorful light that rose into the sky later gave this matter a great mythical color. It was not until this moment that Gu Xingyun finally noticed something from Li Tianlan's every move. That was luck. Li Tianlan's every move, everything, and all the results represented the majestic and almost irresistible luck. Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan looked at each other and saw deep helplessness in each other's eyes. Do you still have strength left? Gu Qianchuan suddenly asked. Gu Xingyun was stunned, and then he shook his head with a bitter smile. What's the point? The moment Li Tianlan knelt down, Gu Xingyun really had a desperate desire to kill him. His kneeling made the Snow Dance Corps completely surrender. But in the end, no matter how strong the Snow Dance Corps was, there were less than 20,000 people now. What made Gu Xingyun most nervous was the signal brought by Li Tianlan's kneeling and the relationship between him and the Dongqing clan. Now there was definite news that the Dongqing clan had completely put its future on Li Tianlan. Even Zhou Yuanshan, who was likely to reach the top, would wholeheartedly assist Li Tianlan. If Zhou Yuanshan reached the top 20 years later, He could guarantee the prestige of the giant group for decades to come. But if Li Tianlan became the chosen one, he could make the Dongxing clan the second Wang family of Beihai. The Dongxing clan naturally knew which was more important. Li Tianlan's kneeling showed his attitude toward the Dongxing clan, which was undoubtedly what many people in the giant group liked. It also meant that it would be smoother for Li Tianlan to take over the authority of Dongxing Wudi in the future. A Li family that controlled the giant group might not be as powerful as the Li family in its heyday, but its strength was directly related to Li Tianlan's strength. Li Tianlan now had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. What if he officially broke through to the Invincible Realm in a few years? With the potential and combat capability that Li Tianlan showed now, once he officially entered the Invincible Realm, Gu Xingyun did not dare to say that he would be his opponent even without stabilizing his realm. Gu Qianchuan asked him if he still had strength left at this time, undoubtedly to let Gu Xingyun kill him at all costs. Even if I have strength left, can I really sneak into Reki City and kill him? After all, he is the marshal of Zhongzhou State. Gu Xingyun said. Why not? Gu Qianchuan said quietly. Gu Xingyun raised his head in astonishment. In his sight, Gu Qianchuan's pale face was calm. Gu Xingyun also understood. Why couldn't he kill him? Now Gu Xingyun was an expert at the peak of the Invincible Realm. Even if he was seriously injured, his realm was there. As long as he had strength left, he could kill him. As long as Gu Xingyun was willing to pay the price. The god of war of Zhongzhou State killed the marshal of Zhongzhou State. In any case, Gu Xingyun could not escape the responsibility. Even if he did not have to pay with his life, he was bound to be imprisoned for life. But if Li Tianlan died, Kunlun City would have time. Even if Kunlun City lost Gu Xingyun, it still had Gu Qianchuan. Kunlun City had been rooted in Zhongzhou State for more than 20 years, and the Special Warfare Group had gradually become mature. As long as there were another 20 years, even if the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State were completely neutral, Kunlun City would have the confidence to protect itself in front of a behemoth like the Wang family of Beihai. Therefore, Gu Qianchuan asked Gu Xingyun to sacrifice himself. For Kunlun City. It's a matter of life and death. Gu Qianchuan laughed at himself. He had no strength left, and his realm was not high enough. Even if he could move, he would not be Li Tianlan's opponent. Gu Xingyun was silent for a long time, then shook his head and said, I can't move. Gu Qianchuan looked at him and did not speak for a long time. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the light in his hand. Others were shocked, angry, admiring, and thoughtful. But his whole consciousness had been completely occupied by the sword light in front of him. The sword light with extremely pure sword intent wrapped him up. The light formed by the sword intent and the sword chi appeared in an extremely calm manner. It was completely unfolded in front of him. It was so strange and so familiar. It seemed familiar. Li Tianlan felt the emotion. It was light and strong emotion. It was joy, intimacy, excitement, approval, docility, and dependence. The sword light in front of him seemed to be alive, constantly jumping in Li Tianlan's hand. He had a sword in his hand. Li Tianlan could not see what the sword looked like, but he could clearly feel that the sword seemed to whisper something in his hand. This is the real peerless sword. Wang Tianzong's voice sounded beside him. Sword Emperor, who had been incompatible with the Snowdance Corps, walked to Li Tianlan's side and looked at the light in his hand seriously. There was a little joy in his tone. What do you see? Li Tianlan asked softly. Nothingness. Wang Tianzong said calmly, but it's very real. He could not see the sword either. But between nothingness and reality, what he felt was the purest sword intent. A real sword should be like this. So should martial arts. A real sword should be alive and have a soul. It could perfectly carry anyone and any level of sword energy. The invincible sword. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm. It stands here and doesn't need to be controlled. Its sword energy is already equivalent to a peak invincible realm expert. Li Tianlan's expression became a little strange. Now in the whole dark world, there were only 5 confirmed experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Tianzong, deity, Lin Fengting, the master of Samsara Palace, and Arsts. Should this sword of nothingness be added now? If this sword was ranked on the divine list, wouldn't it be ranked above Gu Xingyun? Li Tianlan did not find it funny. Instead, he felt a little cold. If so, what kind of sword was it? Who made it? The sword in nothingness seemed to feel Li Tianlan's mood. The sword light trembled slightly in his hand, with a little grievance and dissatisfaction, like a child acting coquettishly. Li Tianlan was a little speechless. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath. He also did not know what kind of sword it was, but he was sure that even if the coldness of 9 states was successfully cast with the human emperor, its spirituality would not reach this level. Your Excellency, can you show up? Wang Tianzong looked at the void with a serious expression and asked. His tone was very respectful. Not because of its strength, but because the sword itself was a miracle. With this sword, no weapon in the world could shake its position as the first divine weapon, whether it was the murderous weapon, listen to the sea, or even the coldness of 9 states. The sword in nothingness did not respond, nor did it have any emotion. Wang Tianzong waited quietly. With his current strength, he might be able to try to forcibly control this sword. But what could a sword equivalent to the peak of the invincible realm do even if he controlled it? It did not belong to him. If he really held it in his hand, not only could he not use it, but it was equivalent to carrying a time bomb. The colorful light slightly fluctuated in Li Tianlan's hand. Some sword light wrapped around Wang Tianzong's body, with faint emotions. That emotion was not hostility, killing intent, or disgust. There was intimacy, but with a touch of complexity and helplessness. The sword whistling in the void seemed to be a sigh. All the emotions slowly disappeared, completely converged, and returned to nothingness. At this moment, it was no longer a life, but a sword, a pure sword. The sword was in Li Tianlan's hand. Wherever the long sword pointed, the tip of the sword pointed. Li Tianlan slowly lowered his palm. The 7-colored radiance that filled the sky instantly boiled. In the void, the sword continued to rise, faster and faster, disappearing into the distance in an instant. The 7-colored light slowly dissipated. The wind and rain did not fall for a while. There was no sunlight between the heavens and the earth. It was murky and pure. What do you think? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. He and Wang Tianzong were enemies, but in the field of sword intent, only Li Tianlan was qualified to discuss swordsmanship with Wang Tianzong. Even if they were enemies, they would be lonely when they didn't see each other. Wang Tianzong felt the direction where the sword light disappeared and was silent for a long time. He thought of the coldness of 9 states cast by the Wang family of Beihai. The coldness of 9 states was not as good as this sword. It was inserted into the spirituality, but it was lacking in the sword qi. This was because compared to the one who had just left, the coldness of the 9 states was only born from the heart. It did not have enough spirituality or sword qi. If he became a chosen one and swept through the dark world with the coldness of the 9 states, when the coldness of the 9 states fully matured, it might not be much weaker than that sword. The most important thing was, Wang Tianzong only wanted a sword. He wanted a sword that could bear his sword intent. The coldness of the 9 states could do it. The other things were no longer important. He shook his head and said slowly, after all, it's just a foreign object. The constantly converging sword light went all the way to the west and landed on the West Mountain. The so-called West Mountain was a low hillside that surrounded the hero square on several sides. Standing on the hillside, one could clearly see everything on the hero square. The master of Samsara Palace, who had been rumored to have fallen and had never appeared even on the date of death and the trial day, stood on the hillside and looked at Li Tianlan in the distance in silence. Qin Weibai, who was wearing a gray windbreaker, stood side by side with the master of Samsara Palace, looking more and more beautiful. Flaming fire stood behind them, as quiet as a statue. The sword light that kept returning to nothingness was getting closer and closer. In the nothingness, the sword body hovered around the 3 of them for a moment and passed by flaming fire. It seemed to hesitate slightly and finally became completely quiet. It's too early for you to make a move. The master of Samsara Palace said softly, have you ever thought that it's not necessarily a good thing to believe in him too early? Why not? Qin Weibai said with a smile, "This kind of timing and occasion is the best." The master of Samsara Palace did not speak for a moment. Her figure was tall and plump. Under the black cloak was an expressionless mask. She was not ugly, but standing in front of Qin Weibai, who was as ethereal as a fairy, she looked ordinary and almost bloated. They were a pair of sisters. When the two stood together, everyone's attention would be attracted by Qin Weibai and thus ignore the master of Samsara Palace. Even if she was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm who stood at the peak of the dark world. Qin Weibai looked at her silent figure. Her eyes were in a trance, and she was lost in thought for a moment. "You're not reconciled?" The master of Samsara Palace suddenly said. Her voice sounded a little low under the mask. "No." Qin Weibai's voice became cold. The master of Samsara Palace seemed unwilling to continue this topic. She looked at Li Tianlan in the distance and said blandly, "You want to mold him into a supreme god, but it's too early now. He's not strong enough. A god is perfect and supreme, without any flaws. Now he's still too weak. Have you ever thought that the higher you push him, the more he can't afford any failure? It's true for him, and it's also true for his subordinates." "What's the matter?" Qin Weibai asked back. "Does it matter?" Samsara Palace, the master of Samsara Palace, took a deep breath. "Wang Tianzong, deity, Lin Fengting, and even me, who isn't stronger than him? The chaos in East Island isn't over yet." Now, Qin Weibai suddenly interrupted the master of Samsara Palace. "It's over. At least for him, it's over. The next final battle has nothing to do with him." The master of Samsara Palace couldn't speak for a moment. Qin Weibai took 2 steps forward and opened her hands, as if she was embracing the sky. Her figure was so delicate, so perfect. "I could have changed a lot of things," she said softly. "Of course, I also changed a lot of things, but I'm not a savior. I just want my man to go higher and make his path easier. From the very beginning, even before the final battle of Changdao, in our plan, Tianlan wouldn't be in the final battle of Eastern Europe. Tianlan will not be in the final battle in Eastern Europe. He has done a good job in Eastern Europe. What belongs to him is over." "But you know him," the master of Samsara Palace said blandly. "In the final battle, both you and I will be there. Tianlan won't stay out of it." She looked at Qin Weibai's back, and her voice was as sharp as a knife. "You don't have any means to persuade him. So, how are you going to let him leave the battlefield of the final battle?" Qin Weibai's figure trembled violently. "He could have left." Qin Weibai's voice suddenly sounded a little agitated. "If everything goes well, in a few days he will leave with Li Huaqing, return to Zhongzhou State, and go to Tiannan to develop. When he hears the news, it will be too late. But Jiang Shangyu is missing." The master of Samsara Palace said, "Whether he intentionally disappeared or not, the direct result of his disappearance is that Li Tianlan can't leave Eastern Europe for the time being. His disappearance directly ruined your plan." Qin Weibai's body trembled slightly. "So, how are you going to keep him out of the battlefield?" The master of Samsara Palace asked more and more directly. "You do it?" In an instant, Qin Weibai's face lost all the blood and became extremely miserable. I said, her voice was light as if she had lost all her soul. "I won't say sorry for the second time in my life." "So?" the master of Samsara Palace asked. There was silence. The silence seemed to have passed for a moment, but it also seemed to be as long as a lifetime. Qin Weibai's voice finally sounded. "I'll do it." The master of Samsara Palace sighed softly with mixed feelings. The Snowdance Corps in the distance began to leave the square. In sight, there were crowds of people everywhere. The master of Samsara Palace hesitated for a moment, walked to Qin Weibai, and patted her on the shoulder. Qin Weibai lowered her head and no longer looked at Li Tianlan or the Snowdance Corps. "Have you ever thought about what he would be like without you and me in this world?" The master of Samsara Palace said softly. Qin Weibai's eyes were in a trance, and she said absent-mindedly, "What can he do? Without you and me, there will be others to replace us. If he doesn't meet me, he will still enter the Sky Academy." Maybe there will be no final battle of East Island, but he will still rise quickly in the Sky Academy, and then his identity will be exposed. She said quietly in a sad voice. Then, he may enter the Wang family of Beihai because he can't bear the pressure he can't bear at all. He will find his own way to be the chosen one and sweep the dark world with the divine weapon given to him by the Wang family of Beihai. He will meet Phoenix Pavilion, 1 or 2 women he loves deeply, and they also love him deeply, but they are destined to die with each other. Just like Li Kuangtu, the old things keep reincarnating. He will die under the sword of his woman, and the Li family will disappear completely. His woman may hide her identity, or take revenge for him with his sword. That may be the era of women. The master of Samsara Palace listened to her quietly without saying a word. The former is sad, and the latter is boring. Finally, Qin Weibai concluded. Boring. The master of Samsara Palace's voice was calm. It's really boring. Qin Weibai nodded. Let's go to see Tonlon. The master of Samsara Palace's body hesitated for a moment. Qin Weibai looked down at her clothes. A gray lady's trench coat, a white scarf, a white cotton shirt, black straight pants, and high heels. She never dressed herself up, but any clothes on her had a kind of dazzling brilliance. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said, "Let's change clothes and go." The master of Samsara Palace nodded. Okay, let's go back to the hotel first. The Manlisai Hotel has been completely cordoned off. It's the place where Wulan State arranged President Li Huaqing to live. I've booked a room in a nearby hotel. Flaming Fire, who had been silent, suddenly became angry. She took a step forward and looked at Qin Weibai. The master of Samsara Palace didn't say anything. Qin Weibai nodded and said casually, "Then let's go there directly." Flaming Fire nodded slightly. The car is already at the foot of the mountain. The 3 of them slowly went down the mountain along the mountain path. Along the way, Flaming Fire wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Qin Weibai didn't seem to notice Flaming Fire's state. Her steps were light and weak. The master of Samsara Palace quietly reached out and grabbed Qin Weibai's arm. She looked at Flaming Fire and asked aloud, "What do you want to say?" Flaming Fire glanced at the master of Samsara Palace and ignored her. The master of Samsara Palace narrowed her eyes slightly and snorted softly. A black car made in Eastern Europe was parked at the foot of the mountain. The 3 of them got in the car in silence. Flaming Fire sat in the driver's seat, silent and motionless. Finally, Qin Weibai looked at her and said slowly, "What do you want to ask?" "What clothes do you want to change, boss?" Flaming Fire hesitated for a while and finally asked directly. "Changing clothes is changing clothes. Have you prepared a lot of clothes?" Qin Weibai asked curiously. Flaming Fire turned to look at Qin Weibai's bright and crystal eyes and said stubbornly, "You know what I mean." She paused and continued, "I will never agree." Qin Weibai reached out and tidied the hair in front of Flaming Fire's forehead. She said softly, "Don't think too much." "I didn't think too much." Flaming Fire said quietly, "I just don't agree." She turned to look at the master of Samsara Palace and said with cold eyes, "Why?" The master of Samsara Palace did not speak. Flaming Fire sneered and said, "Do you deserve it?" "Enough." Qin Weibai suddenly opened her mouth and said coldly. Flaming Fire's fierce momentum stagnated for a moment and finally fell silent. "I don't want to go to the hotel." After a long time, Flaming Fire said softly. For some reason, her eyes were slightly red. "You have to let Tianlon see it." Qin Weibai said softly. She touched Flaming Fire's head and said, "Drive." Flaming Fire was silent. From Mormons to Reki City, they took a private plane and didn't stop. The reason for all of this was actually so simple. It didn't matter whether they missed her or not. The important thing was to let Tianlon see it. Look at her. Look at her. And her. Chapter 554. When Eastern Europe was approaching the end, the final maneuver of the 2 academies in Zhongzhou State finally came to an end. After the maneuvers, the statistics of credits were handed over to the presidents of the 2 academies as soon as possible. The presidents of the two academies reported the credits to Kunlun City. After the verification, Kunlun City would distribute a series of rewards and treatments to each force and each young student according to the credits. Then it was the graduation ceremony. The high-level officials and teachers of the two academies would spend a few months summarizing the teaching situation of this year, exchanging experiences, re-rating the strength of each teacher, transferring personnel, rewarding teachers with outstanding achievements in the past 3 years, and formulating the teaching direction and focus of the two academies for the next year. Then it was the annual leave and a short vacation. After the vacation, when the personnel of the two academies were completely stable, the two academies announced the enrollment requirements of the new year. Kunlun City and the Army headquarters jointly issued a document, which was transmitted to the entire military world and the special warfare system. Any young elites who met the enrollment requirements and were interested in entering the two academies would choose the Sky Academy or the Deep Sea Academy. Then the teachers of the two academies would lead teams to various places for the assessment. After the assessment, the new classes of the two academies would officially start again at the end of March or the beginning of April next year, around the Qingming festival. To some extent, the final result of the last maneuver of the two academies directly affected the direction of the new students' choice and the support of the military and the special warfare system for the two academies. So Zhuang Huayang was very busy. The Sky Academy really shone in this year and completely left the Deep Sea Academy behind. Li Tianlan's rise directly broke the pattern of the young generation and even the entire Zhongzhou state experts. The Deep Sea Academy originally had Jiang Shangyu, Dongqing Rushi, and Song Ci. From the beginning, the Deep Sea Academy's glory was far stronger than that of the Sky Academy. But Li Tianlan defeated 3 young chosen ones and many elites in one fell swoop in the final maneuver, which also completely shattered the pride of the Deep Sea Academy. From the beginning to the end of the maneuver, the East Emperor Palace only participated in the team maneuver on the first day, and only Li Tianlan participated. But the credits accumulated by the East Emperor Palace had more than twice that of the second place, the 3000 world. The East Emperor Palace was the force of the Sky Academy, and all this was naturally the glory of the Sky Academy. As the Dean of the Sky Academy, within 24 hours after the maneuver, Zhuang Huayang had been commended many times by the parliament, the cabinet, the military, and Kunlun City. After all, the total credits of the Sky Academy in this maneuver had surpassed that of the Deep Sea Academy. With such a brilliant achievement, the parliament of Zhongzhou State almost unanimously approved the appointment of Zhuang Huayang to continue to serve in the Sky Academy. Zhuang Huayang naturally knew the reason. From this moment on, although he was still the backbone of the academics, he had already stepped on the boat of the East Emperor Palace. On the surface, he stayed in the Sky Academy to commend his achievements, but there was more than one kind of commendation. With his age and military rank, the high-level officials of the army headquarters and Kunlun City had talked to him before, hoping that he could serve in the Ministry of National Defense and serve as the deputy minister after this term. In fact, it was tantamount to giving him an idle job in retirement. Of course, this retirement position was what everyone dreamed of, and it might not be worse than now. However, after thinking for a long time, Zhuang Huayang finally expressed the idea of continuing to shine in the Sky Academy. His care for Li Tianlan was well known. Nowadays, the Academy, the Giant Group, and Sai City were very close, and the core figure was Li Tianlan and the East Emperor Palace. It could be foreseen that as long as Li Tianlan went all the way up in the future, Zhuang Huayang sitting in this position was unlikely to step down. Instead, he would always hold the power of the Sky Academy and attract talents for the East Emperor Palace. The Academy would also intervene in the special warfare system with the rise of the East Emperor Palace's status. The cooperation between the two sides was a complete win-win situation. Zhuang Huayang might have to wait until the East Emperor Palace was strong enough to decide the sensitive position of the Dean of the Sky Academy. But at that time, Li Huaqing had already left the office and gave up the supreme power. The academics, which was in a dormant period, could negotiate with the powerful East Emperor Palace on this issue and find a new direction of cooperation, such as the current governor of Xianxia, Zhou Yuanshan. Knowing his position clearly, Zhuang Huayang naturally knew what he should do. As soon as the maneuver ended, he sent a notice to the East Emperor Palace and invited them to return to the Sky Academy to confirm the future development direction. This matter could even be said to be the most important thing for Zhuang Huayang. For the East Emperor Palace, it was also extremely important. The sun shone in the spacious office. Zhuang Huayang held a list in his hand and looked at it attentively. Sitting opposite Zhuang Huayang, Li Beidian calmly watched Zhuang Huayang frown. After a long time, Zhuang Huayang put down the list in his hand and said slowly, "You actually want all of these people?" There were thousands of students in the two academies, but there were only hundreds of elites who could really enter the eyes of the major forces. The East Emperor Palace naturally had no right to be picky. As a new force, even with Li Tianlan in charge, the scope of the East Emperor Palace's selection of talents was still extremely narrow. The graduates of the two academies were their biggest market. This market was indeed very large. In the eyes of Kunlun City, there were nearly 100 students who applied to join the East Emperor Palace. In the eyes of Wang Qinglei, this list had already exceeded 100 people. But looking at the entire Sky Academy, this year, there were more than 860 students who wanted to join the East Emperor Palace and had submitted applications to the political departments of the two academies. The East Emperor Palace was also generous enough. They wanted to accept more than 800 people without leaving a single one. Zhuang Huayang was a little worried. He took a deep look at Li Beidian and said slowly, "Do you know what this means?" Li Beidian nodded with a smile. In the case of Li Tianlan in Eastern Europe, he had full authority to represent the East Emperor Palace. This decision was made after many internal discussions and communication with various parties. More than 800 people. This is just the combat capability. The East Emperor Palace accepted them. In fact, it is equivalent to accepting their relatives and even their families. There is no shortage of experts on this list, and they also have vassals around them. So if all of them are counted, the East Emperor Palace has accepted at least more than 1,000 students this time. Including their families, the number of people in the East Emperor Palace will even exceed 5,000. Zhuang Huayang said in a deep voice. Any new force had to develop slowly. Even if it was a big gamble, there must be a limit. The current behavior of the East Emperor Palace was completely crazy. To accept so many people in one breath, it needed great financial resources, future potential, and a stable chain of interests. Now, the East Emperor Palace had nothing but potential. Headmaster, we have indeed considered this problem, but at present, it seems that it is not impossible to solve. The new East Emperor Palace will give everyone a huge surprise. Li Beidian said calmly, as for this list, only about 1/10 of the people really enter the headquarters of the East Emperor Palace. The East Emperor Palace will set up a new branch in the near future, and most of the people on the list will develop in the branch. Zhuang Huayang stared at Li Beidian. He even thought that the young man in front of him was crazy. The East Emperor Palace had just been established, and it had not yet stabilized. How could he want to set up a branch? The corner of his mouth moved, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Headmaster, if you have anything to say, you can say it directly. Although we have graduated, we will always be your students. Li Beidian laughed. Zhuang Huayang snorted coldly, stood up and said, "It's nonsense. The East Emperor Palace is in the limelight now. The most important thing to do at present is to keep a low profile. The East Emperor Palace has accepted so many talents at once. Do you really think that other forces have no temper? Bodhisattva? Well, your foundation is not stable, and you start to set up a branch. What kind of institution is this branch? Who will be responsible? Do you think you don't have enough shortcomings? The new branch is called Nightmare Corps. It is probably a strengthened regiment. The East Emperor Palace is the first in this maneuver. With Tianlan's position, we want to fight for A-class authorization for Nightmare Corps." Li Beidian said. Zhuang Huayang took a deep breath and shook his head with a wry smile. Nightmare Corps was also a special warfare legion. The strengthened regiment would have about 3,000 people, and the commander's military rank was at least a colonel. These were easy to deal with. The key was A-class authorization. There were 4 levels of authorization in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. B-class authorization was common and could be regarded as the basic and middle level. Most small special warfare agencies were B-class authorization. A-class authorization was already a behemoth. They had the power to expand freely in a certain province. The special operations bureaus of each province were all A-class authorization. Originally, the current status of the East Emperor Palace should also give them A-class authorization. To get A-class authorization, the strength must be at the peak of the Thundershocking realm and the military rank of lieutenant general or above. Li Tianlan was now the marshal of Zhongzhou State. After the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, he returned to China and handed over the position of the commander of the Snowdance Corps, but he was still the marshal. Therefore, the new East Emperor Palace would get S-class authorization, which was on the same level as the regional special warfare headquarters. Its status was equivalent to that of a member of parliament. Above the S-class was the X-class. In the entire Zhongzhou State, only Kunlun City had the X-class authorization and could expand freely within the territory of Zhongzhou State. In the current state, an S-class authorization was enough for the East Emperor Palace to digest. Li Baidian even wanted an A-class authorization? Let's not talk about whether you can get the A-class authorization. Even if you get it, who in your East Emperor Palace is qualified to be the commander of this nightmare corps? Zhuang Huayang asked seriously. Marshal Li can't do it himself, can he? The strength at the peak of the Thundershocking realm and the military rank of lieutenant general. Li Baidian was now the second most important person in the East Emperor Palace, but his realm was still some distance from the peak of the Thundershocking realm, and his qualifications were not enough to be promoted to lieutenant general. The Li family, Sai City, and Dongqing clan could provide such people, but it was unlikely to get the A-class authorization with these people. In the entire East Emperor Palace, only Li Wangxing, the lieutenant general of Black Tortoise in Zhongzhou State, was barely qualified. But he was just barely qualified. His military rank was enough, but his strength was slightly poor. And the position of the Terracotta Army could not be easily given up. As for the other one, Dongqing Rushi, her strength was enough, but her strength was not strong enough to be promoted as an exception as Li Tianlan's. And to say the least, even if Li Wangxing and Dongqing Rushi were promoted, their strength was not enough to quell the controversy. At that time, there would be many people who were dissatisfied and challenged. Once they failed, the entire East Emperor Palace would be affected. At present, we have found the candidate for the commander of the Nightmare Corps. He has confirmed that he will join the East Emperor Palace, and I believe that his strength can be promoted and fully recognized by Zhongzhou State. No one will be bored enough to challenge him. Li Baidian said seriously. Zhuang Huayang thought about it with some doubts and asked, "Where is he?" "He is still with Tianlan in Eastern Europe," Li Baidian said. Zhuang Huayang thought about the young expert who was now with Li Tianlan and said uncertainly, "Dongqing Rushi?" Li Baidian shook his head. Zhuanyuantai, Zhongzhou State, Lin Yuxian, the young master of the Lin clan. Is he qualified? This chapter is purely coded by mobile phone. There is a power outage at home. We said that there would be no electricity at 10 o'clock. If there are any typos, please bear with it. Chapter 555. There was some doubt in Zhuang Huayang's eyes, but it soon turned into surprise. Li Baidian's words contained too much information and represented too many things. Lin clan, Zhuanyuantai, Zhongzhou State. Every word was the key of the key. This was also something that Zhongzhou State had been secretly looking forward to for a long time. The Lin clan lived in seclusion. They were far away in Switzerland and had almost never interfered in any affairs of the dark world. In this state, the Lin clan, in the era when experts at the peak of the invincible realm could almost represent everything, was absolutely worth the effort of any force to rope in. Zhongzhou State had also tried several times, but the Lin clan had never given any response. Now that Lin Yuxian joined the East Emperor Palace, it was absolutely a good start. He would serve as the commander of the Nightmare Army, so he must become a citizen of Zhongzhou State and even join the political party of Zhongzhou State. After all, he was the heir of the Lin clan. Even if the Lin clan allowed Lin Yuxian to develop a branch alone, the Lin clan was bound to change its attitude toward Zhongzhou state in the future because of his relationship with the Lin clan. If a behemoth like the Lin clan supported a country with the same voice, it was actually very troublesome. Support at all costs often meant that the supported country had to pay an unimaginable price. For example, no one could deny the great contribution that the Wang family of Beihai and Zhongzhou state brought to Zhongzhou state. But the existence of the Wang family of Beihai often made Zhongzhou state seem very embarrassed. The young master of the Lin clan joined the East Emperor Palace, and the Lin clan had a very important branch in the country. At some point, if the Lin clan's position leaned toward Zhongzhou state, it would have a huge influence. In the eyes of Zhongzhou state, this was a real win-win situation. No wonder, Zhuang Huayang muttered to himself and suddenly asked with some uncertainty, "What did Lin Yuxian say?" He has already shown his attitude by going to Eastern Europe with Tianlan. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he couldn't get away from Eastern Europe, he might have come to meet the headmaster in person today. Li Beidian said with a smile. Zhuang Huayang took a deep look at him and didn't say anything. He understood Lin Yuxian's attitude and naturally understood Li Beidian's subtext. Didn't it mean that if Lin Yuxian was free, he would represent the East Emperor Palace to discuss the list with Zhuang Huayang today? In other words, in the future sequence of the East Emperor Palace, the first was Li Tianlan, and the real second was Lin Yuxian. Judging from Li Beidian's current attitude, he wasn't dissatisfied with this. There were only a few cores in the East Emperor Palace. After Li Tianlan, it was Li Beidian and Dongqing Rushi. They were all experts who were likely to break through and enter the invincible realm. Dongqing Rushi would not fight for anything. If Li Beidian was willing to give up the position of number 2, Ning Qianqing, who was slightly less talented, and Su Chu would not do anything. Du Hanyin belonged to Sai City, and Wang Yuetong was in an awkward position. In this way, as long as Li Beidian did not fight for it, the core lineup of the East Emperor Palace would be extremely stable in the future. For anyone looking forward to the future of the East Emperor Palace, this was good news. I will communicate with the chief immediately. East Emperor Palace will probably get the authorization of the Nightmare Army at the graduation ceremony. Zhuang Huayang said without hesitation, full of confidence. If the commander of the Nightmare Army was not Lin Yuxian, he would not be so confident, and he might not even report it to the higher-ups. But if it was Lin Yuxian, all the problems would be solved. Zhongzhou state was completely willing to make an exception to promote Lin Yuxian. With the status of the Lin clan in the Dark World, Zhongzhou state was even willing to pay more. Kunlun City naturally would not like this appointment, but it was impossible to oppose it openly, because it was useless even if it did. If Gu Xingyun really dared to say no, the whole Zhongzhou state, not to mention the counselors and directors, even the wealthy families who had various cooperation with the Lin clan would teach him what to focus on the overall situation. Li Beidian laughed. Before he came, he knew this would be the result. He pointed to the list in Zhuang Huayang's hand and said, "This? I'll arrange it." Zhuang Huayang waved his hand and looked at the list in his hand. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." Among the hundreds of names, the oldest was already 31 years old, and the weakest had crossed the ice-condensing realm, which was the standard for graduation from the East Emperor Palace. Many of them were not geniuses, but there was still room for improvement. Conservatively speaking, the worst potential could reach the peak of the ice-condensing realm. From the ice-condensing realm to the fire-flaming realm, to the thunder-shocking realm, and to the half-step invincible realm. The starting point of the East Emperor Palace was unimaginably high, and it had formed its own talent echelon. If Li Tianlan could break through to the invincible realm in a short time, the entire East Emperor Palace would become pivotal in the Dark World. Even now, as long as Li Tianlan came back, the East Emperor Palace could be regarded as a force that no one in Zhongzhou state could ignore. The most important thing was that it was just the beginning. 3 years later, with Li Tianlan's steady rise in Zhongzhou state, how many people would want to join the East Emperor Palace when the graduates of the 2 academies graduated again? And what realm would the people who joined the East Emperor Palace be in 3 years? Zhuang Huayang was a little emotional. Vaguely, he seemed to see a surging tide rolling over from a distance, with the general trend of crushing everything, constantly subverting all the orders of the old era. The younger generation will surpass us in time, he sighed softly. Headmaster, you flatter me. Li Baidian smiled implicitly. If there's nothing else, I should go back. How could there be nothing else? Zhuang Huayang said helplessly, at the graduation ceremony, you have to speak on behalf of the East Emperor Palace. Marshal Li can't spare time to come back. Don't you support him? Speak? Li Baidian was stunned and then laughed. It's not my business. I'm not the one to speak on behalf of the East Emperor Palace at the graduation ceremony. Then who is it? Zhuang Huayang asked curiously. It's Yuetong. Li Baidian said calmly. The corner of Zhuang Huayang's mouth twitched violently, as if he couldn't believe it. When the Sword Emperor of the Wang family of Beihai and Li Tianlan were at loggerheads in Eastern Europe, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai spoke on behalf of Li Tianlan. Is it Wang Yuetong? He couldn't help but ask again. Li Baidian shook his head and said, No, it's Yuetong. Wang Yuetong was climbing the mountain. The smooth mountain road of Mount Dibing was getting farther and farther behind her. She walked quietly and didn't take a car. Instead, she observed the beautiful scenery around Mount Dibing step by step. She didn't leave Mount Dibing for a long time, but when she came back this time, she felt as if a lifetime had passed. She was a little thinner, but she looked more beautiful. She used to be stubborn and lively, but now she was strong and calm. In a short time, she seemed to have undergone a complete transformation. In other words, it was a leap from immaturity to maturity. She passed the mountainside and approached the top. There was an antique pavilion at the bottom of the mountain. In the summer when flowers and plants were flourishing, the pavilion was located among the flowers and plants, vicissitudes and elegance. Summer Solstice was standing in the pavilion and looking at Wang Yuetong. Her eyes were full of helplessness and pity. Wang Yuetong's footsteps trembled slightly. She stopped and looked at Summer Solstice without saying anything. Why don't you take a car up? Summer Solstice came over and tidied her daughter's hair, asking softly. Wang Yuetong didn't say anything but just whispered, Mom, have you thought it through? Summer Solstice said softly, If you have, come back. I'll ask someone to help you tidy up your room. Wang Yuetong shook her head and whispered, I just want to come back to see you, Mom. I'll go back later. No matter where you are, you can only use it when you arrive at Mount Dibing. Summer Solstice's voice was gentle and soft, but extremely firm. Wang Yuetong bit her lip and didn't speak. Summer Solstice didn't seem to want to embarrass her daughter. She sighed softly, touched her short hair, and whispered, Do you miss me? This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Is there something else? Of course, if you want me to ask your father to let Tianlan go, you'd better not ask. At this time, I can't persuade him, and I'm in no position to persuade him. Wang Yuetong shook her head and smiled bitterly. When I left here last time, I made up my mind. No matter what, I won't embarrass my father in the future, nor will I embarrass him. Summer Solstice looked at Wang Yuetong quietly, and there was some understanding in her eyes. Neither side embarrassed her, so she was the only one who was embarrassed. Don't you feel wronged? Summer Solstice asked softly. Wang Yuetong shook her head and said softly, No. Summer Solstice was in a daze. She thought of the trial day in Eastern Europe. That night, even when the Snowdance Corps collapsed and Li Tianlan's life was at stake, Wang Yuetong didn't make a sound. She had never called Summer Solstice or Wang Tianzong. That night, Eastern Europe was turned upside down. That night, Zhongzhou state was turbulent. That night, Tian'an felt like a year. What was Wang Yuetong thinking about that night? Tianlan won't die this time. With his current position, at least in Eastern Europe this time, your father can't kill him. But silly girl, do you know that President Li Huaqing brought nearly 60 families to Eastern Europe this time? Most of them belong to the giant group. Even if a few people from other groups want to get benefits in Eastern Europe, they must get Li Tianlan's approval. Among them, there are people from the Special Warfare Group. He will contact more and more people, and his foundation will become more and more stable. In any case, this is what your father doesn't want to see. He can't do anything to Tianlan, but it doesn't mean that he can't do anything to those people. Summer Solstice said softly. Wang Yuetong's face turned pale for a moment, and then she shook her head and said, Mom, I'm not here to listen to this. Xia Ji sighed again and said helplessly, Well, what do you want to tell me? I'm here for the graduation ceremony of the Sky Academy. Wang Yuetong said softly. Summer Solstice's face changed slightly. At the graduation ceremony, Yuetong will speak on behalf of East Emperor Palace. Wang Yuetong's eyes were clear and firm. Yuetong? Summer Solstice narrowed her eyes. Wang Yuetong agreed and became more determined. Summer Solstice sighed softly. Yuetong's surname was neither Wang nor Li. Had he lost his surname after all? Have you ever thought that if this goes on one day, you will have nowhere to go? Summer Solstice said softly. Wang Yuetong shook her head and said softly, No. Summer Solstice smiled bitterly. When she was about to speak, the entire Mount Dibing trembled for no reason. It was not an earthquake. The magnificent Mount Dibing trembled for a moment and then returned to normal. In an instant, the entire Mount Dibing was filled with sword energy. Endless sword energy stirred the space and came back from all directions on the ground. In the core area of the top of Mount Dibing, a space completely condensed by sword energy suddenly rushed to the sky. The world seemed to become dim. All the colors on Mount Dibing faded. Sword light lit up in the majestic sword energy. There was only black and white. The black and white sword light enveloped the entire Mount Dibing. The sky and the earth all became hazy for a while. Wang Yuetong was absent-minded for a moment. This sword is called Coldness of 9 States. Summer Solstice's voice was faint. The black and white sword light flickered slightly. Under the sword light, a flame suddenly rose up. The flame was not blazing, but it kept burning. The color was extremely bright. Even in the black and white sword light, it was still extremely strong. For the first time, there was surprise in Summer Solstice's eyes. It's Xianxia, she said. He broke through. End of this chapter. Chapter 556. Li Huaqing's time was indeed tight. Therefore, as soon as the memorial service ended, Zhongzhou State had already determined the time for the welcome dinner with Wulan State. This dinner, which was destined to divide up most of the property of Wulan State and even the 5 Eastern European countries, would be held tomorrow evening. At this time, it was enough for many important figures in Eastern Europe to come to Reki City, and it was also enough for Zhongzhou State and Wulan State to sign a series of agreements. This was the main purpose of Li Huaqing's visit to Wulan State. The dinner party had to be held after the signing of the agreement. Only in this way could Zhongzhou State be sure of what it had got and then negotiate with all the powerful families in Eastern Europe. Therefore, not only Li Huaqing was pressed for time, but Wulan State was also pressed for time. They had to finalize all the agreements on the last day. The agreements that were about to be signed largely represented the future of Wulan State. Rick seemed to be prepared. When the Snowdance Corps retreated, he had already arranged for someone to lead the delegation of Zhongzhou State to the hotel. As for Li Tianlan, Li Huaqing, and Wang Tianzong, they went directly to the office of the president, or to the place where Wang Tianzong was imprisoned. The new location of the office of the president will be about 9 kilometers away. The original location of the Caesar Hotel will become the new office of the president. This square will be expanded. I have communicated with Commander Cheng Huaining of the Arctic Ocean Command and reported to Minister Dongqing. Within 3 months, the Arctic Ocean Command will support the Snowdance Corps with a batch of armaments. With them here, Wulan State will be stable in the future. The black Hongqi was driving on the highway. Li Tianlan looked at the parade square outside the window and reported in a calm tone. At this time, Riker was not in the car. Li Zhonghu drove in person, so he could speak freely. Therefore, Li Tianlan had no scruples and said straightforwardly, Zhongzhou State can be more ruthless. On this point, Riker has enough psychological preparation. After the agreement is signed, there will be some details. I will talk to Riker then. Li Huaqing patted his shoulder and said gently, You've worked hard. Li Tianlan shook his head and said quietly, The soldiers of the Snowdance Corps are working hard. Of course. Li Huaqing nodded. Xianxia state will commend them collectively and improve their treatment. As for the martyrs who sacrifice themselves, I will inform the military headquarters to increase their compensation. We can't let these heroes die with worry. Listening to Li Huaqing's habitual official tone, Li Tianlan was silent for a while and did not speak. What about the rotation of the Snowdance Corps? Wang Tianzong, who was silent, suddenly kept his composure. He asked. Li Huaqing's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong. He said blandly, "The current plan is that the rotation time is 3 years. The members of the Snowdance Corps are real iron-blooded men. 3 years later, they will return home." Li Zhonghu suddenly opened his mouth and said, "We have consulted all the experts in advance. Of a warrior, in my opinion, they are willing to stay here for the next 3 years. What about 3 years later?" Wang Tianzong continued asking. Li Tianlan glanced at him, smiled, and said nothing. The meaning was obvious. Since Li Tianlan, Reki City would naturally be in the hands of the Li family. The Li family did not mind other people coming to take a share, but they must abide by the order of the Li family. Only the military power maintained the order. More than 10,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps were stationed here, fully equipped, which was equivalent to tens of thousands of troops. They would be stationed here for 3 years. As for what troops would come after 3 years, it was something that Li Tianlan should consider. It had nothing to do with Wang Tianzong. It was only 3 years. With Li Tianlan's current momentum, could he really come up with an army that could replace the Snowdance Corps after 3 years if he held Reki City tightly? It's good for young people to be confident. Wang Tianzong said slowly. Li Tianlan quietly waited for Wang Tianzong's but Wang Tianzong, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He did not go on, so he nodded and said, yes. A part of the Beihai Corps will be stationed in Eastern Europe in the near future, and the garrison area will probably be concentrated in Snow Country. If the Snowdance Corps is under pressure, Marshal Li can temporarily mobilize the Beihai Corps to be stationed in Reki City. Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. Li Huaqing frowned and did not speak. The Beihai Corps would be stationed in Snow Country? Snow Country was the world's hegemon. Although their experience was backward, they still maintained the world's top military strength. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, all the superpowers had stayed in Snow Country, but no one was willing to fight in Snow Country. Now the chaos in Eastern Europe was about to end. Wang Tianzong was going to attack Snow Country. Take action? Perhaps Snow Country itself did not know that the Beihai Corps was going to be stationed in Snow Country, right? Are you sure? Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. Wang Tianzong was calm and simple. It was just one word, but he said it with great confidence. If you need support, just say it, Your Majesty. Although the Snowdance Corps is small, we will not be stingy with support. Wang Tianzong said faintly, Marshal Li, take care of yourself first. Even if there is no war in Wulan State in the future, it will be extremely lively. If you need to borrow troops, just come to me. Li Tianlan sneered and did not speak. Both of you are the pillars of Xianxia State. There is no need to make many things so rigid. Xianxia State is very big and can accommodate the Wang family of Beihai. Naturally, there is also the soil for the development of the Li family. Especially now, both of you are outside Xianxia State. I hope you two can still make a fool of yourself. I hope you two can still focus on the overall situation. Li Huaqing had a headache. Before the chaos in Eastern Europe, if everything was not obvious, the conflict between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai had become extremely acute. Li Huaqing came to Reki City this time mainly for the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. But in private, he also wanted to coordinate the relationship between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong, Li Tianlan. The current Sword Emperor and the future East Emperor were the present and the future of Xianxia State. In the future, the conflict between the two would continue to intensify, which was a good thing for everyone outside Xianxia State. But for Xianxia State, no one wanted to see it. Before Li Huaqing left, he received a lot of very important calls, including the leaders of the Southeast Group, the Giant Group, and even the senior executives of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group. The grievances between the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family were difficult to completely solve, but countless people hoped that Li Huaqing could control the conflict between the two within a certain range. But now, Wang Tianzong was going to attack Snow Country. But his purpose was obviously not just for Snow Country. Once he took down Snow Country and stationed a large number of troops in Snow Country, the Snowdance Corps and the Beihai Corps in Snow Country were bound to have constant conflicts in the future. The positions of the two sides would also make the soldiers of both sides want to annex the other. Just like what the two people said just now, the support seemed very generous. But thinking about it, whether it was the Snowdance Corps or the Beihai Corps, if they encountered problems in Eastern Europe, they would not ask for help from the other side even if they died in battle. It was easy to invite a god in, but difficult to send him away. The strength of Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong was not equal. Limited to Eastern Europe, their status was already equal. Once their armies entered each other's territory, if one side insisted on not leaving, the other side really had no good way. Li Huaqing also had no good way. The Wang family of Beihai had its own development path. He could not persuade Wang Tianzong to give up Snow Country, and he was reluctant to do so. But he was also reluctant to let Li Tianlan give up Wulan State. The final result could only be that the Beihai Corps and the Snowdance Corps stayed in Eastern Europe to fight openly and secretly. Now the only thing Li Huaqing could do was to persuade these two chosen one to really take the overall situation into account. The car slowly turned and stopped in the square in front of the office of the president. Li Huaqing got out of the car and suddenly asked, "How is Tribulation's injury?" It was also a big deal. For, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. For any country, the physical condition of an invincible realm expert in its country was a big deal. And his words could be regarded as a reminder to Wang Tianzong. The new commander of the Snowdance Corps recommended by Li Tianlan was Tribulation. Tribulation was no match for Wang Tianzong. But Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan were the same. They could not stay in Eastern Europe for a long time. If Wang Tianzong left, no matter who was stationed in Snow Country, they would not be a match for Tribulation. Di Jiang might be able to stop Tribulation, but the Border Control Corps was obviously more important. Wang Tianzong would not leave him in Eastern Europe. As long as he left, the Snowdance Corps would obviously have more confidence than the Beihai Corps. Moreover, Tribulation's qualifications and abilities were enough. Even the Southeast Group could not find any reason to object to him replacing Li Tianlan. Martial Uncle's injury is fine. Li Tianlan did not say it clearly. In fact, Tribulation's injury was very serious, but it was not really fatal. Most of his injuries came from the loss of strength caused by his entanglement with Paul. As for other injuries, although they were also serious, he had regained his ability to move. After that, he would recover very quickly. Even if Li Tianlan had to leave in a short time, he could rest assured. In his current state, he is fully competent for the position of commander of the Snowdance Corps. Tribulation is naturally reassuring to be the marshal. Reki City may not be peaceful in the future. There is no clue about Jiang Shangyu's disappearance. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for Marshal Li to leave at this time. Wang Tianzong said blandly. It was also a reminder. Even if the general placed here by the Wang family of Beihai was no match for Tribulation, there was still Jiang Shangyu in the Snowdance Corps. And compared with Gu Xingyun, who was afraid that Li Tianlan had troops in Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong did not want Li Tianlan to go to Tiannan. Otherwise, he would not have hesitated to break through until now. I won't leave until I find Jiang Shangyu, Li Tianlan said blandly. They slowly walked into the messy office of the president and into the room where Wang Tianzong temporarily lived. Although it's good to talk here, the hotel is better. Tianzong, Tianlan, what happened before was just a misunderstanding. Now that it's over, it's okay to talk it over. Wulan State is fully capable of arranging a residence for Tianzong that is more suitable for his identity. Li Huaqing said with a chuckle, but his eyes were looking at Li Tianlan. On the trial day, the news that he had imprisoned Wang Tianzong had spread throughout Zhongzhou State, which made his prestige soar. Now that the matter was over, he continued to lock Wang Tianzong up. It was meaningless. Sure enough, Li Tianlan nodded and said, I have no problem with that. No need. Wang Tianzong laughed. He reached out and poured a cup of tea for Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan respectively. He said slowly, It's good here. It's quiet, and no one will disturb me when I practice calligraphy. I'm very satisfied with it. He paused and said with a smile, Anyway, I won't live for a long time. I'll stay here. How long? How long? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. His eyes were a little dignified. Wang Tianzong was about to speak when his cell phone suddenly rang. He took out his cell phone and looked at it. It was a text message from Summer Solstice. Wang Tianzong looked down at the text message. Quietly, Li Tianlan suddenly noticed that every inch of space around him had become extremely sharp and awe-inspiring. Wang Tianzong seemed to be sharper than before. He glanced at Li Tianlan and said blandly, 3 days, that's enough. Li Tianlan's pupils instantly contracted to the extreme. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 557. After coming out of Wang Tianzong's residence, accompanied by Li Tianlan, Li Huaqing visited the Snowdance Corps stationed on the parade square. President Li Huaqing listened carefully to the reports of the 2 deputy marshals, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, and met with Li Zhonghu, Sun Mengran, and other high-level members of the Snowdance Corps. Li Huaqing discussed the future garrison plan of the Snowdance Corps with the senior management of the Snowdance Corps. He affirmed the achievements of the Snowdance Corps in Eastern Europe this time, wrote down some requirements of the Snowdance Corps about armaments, and said that he would implement them as soon as possible after returning home. Then, accompanied by a group of high-level officials, President Li Huaqing visited the wounded and soldiers of the Snowdance Corps and talked cordially with the representatives of the soldiers. It was not until dusk fell and Riker came to pick him up that Li Huaqing returned to the Manlisai Hotel where he stayed. Li Tianlan stayed and had dinner in the station. After dinner, Tribulation, who had not recovered from his injury but was breathing more peacefully, made a cup of tea. He looked at Li Tianlan and said with a smile, What's the matter? Say it. Li Tianlan pondered over the wording. Tribulation was not in a hurry and waited quietly. Since Li Tianlan did not go back with Li Huaqing, he knew that he must have something to do. Is it hard to fight for the position of the Snowdance Corps? That won't happen. Li Tianlan shook his head. There were not many people in Zhongzhou State who could beat Tribulation in terms of qualifications and strength, or even none. Moreover, he had the full support of the giant group. As long as Tribulation nodded, he would become the new and irreplaceable marshal. Wang Tianzong is about to break through. He thought about it and finally decided to tell the truth. His tone was simple and calm, as if he was talking about a trivial matter. Tribulation's hand, which was holding the teacup, suddenly shook. The tea spilled on his hand. It was scalding hot, but he didn't seem to feel it. He looked at Li Tianlan with a stunned expression. Wang Tianzong. Breakthrough. When these 2 phrases were put together, it was like a raging wolf, surging and suffocating. Tribulation didn't even know what to say for a moment. The entire Dark World knew that Wang Tianzong's realm had completely surpassed the peak of the Invincible Realm. But he had been in the Invincible Realm for many years. After years of accumulation, he took a step forward. Countless people thought that Wang Tianzong was lucky. How long has it been? Was he going to break through again? Could he really break through again after surpassing the peak of the Invincible Realm? Is he going to break through? With some uncertainty, Tribulation repeated it again. Li Tianlan nodded. Thinking about Wang Tianzong's words, he said in a low voice, Within 3 days at the earliest and 3 days at the latest. Tribulation's face suddenly became gloomy. Even the time could be determined. This was not a possibility at all, but an absolute certainty. The corner of his mouth twitched. He wanted to say something, but he suddenly felt lost. The general trend in Reki City had been settled, and so had the general trend in the entire Eastern Europe. But if Wang Tianzong broke through at this time, what did they do before Count 4? Once Wang Tianzong broke through again, he alone would be the general trend of the entire Dark World. The whole room seemed to be filled with an extremely oppressive force. Tribulation took a deep breath with difficulty and said dryly, You broke through after surpassing the half-step invincible realm. What realm is that? Li Tianlan smiled bitterly and said nothing. In fact, it didn't matter what the realm above the invincible realm was called. What mattered was that in this era where the peak force was only the peak of the invincible realm, Wang Tianzong broke through again and was the real chosen one. Heaven's pride was unparalleled. Let's call it supreme? Li Tianlan said with some ridicule. Tribulation glanced at him and suddenly said, "What's Wang Tianzong's plan? He won't touch Reki City for the time being, and he can't. But with the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, how can he be willing to get nothing in Eastern Europe? If they let go of Reki City, he will definitely seize other places in Eastern Europe, at least Snow Country." Li Tianlan whispered, "The Beihai core has begun to lurk in Snow Country." Tribulation took a deep breath and asked again, "What about the president?" Li Tianlan's eyes were a little indifferent, and he said calmly, "When we were chatting, the president hoped that the Beihai core and the Snowdance core could help each other in Eastern Europe in the future." Tribulation stood up with a sneer, held the teacup in his hand, and said in a cold voice, "What does that mean?" Li Tianlan thought for a moment and said, "It's probably literal." Tribulation took 2 steps back and forth, looked at the wind and rain outside, and said slowly, "Is this neutral?" "Yes, it must be neutral." Li Tianlan did not speak. This was a very normal thing. Even a fool knew that once the Beihai core gained a foothold in Snow Country, it would be impossible to coexist peacefully with the Snowdance core. The Snowdance core was now a sharp sword in Li Tianlan's hand. The East Emperor Palace had just started. Sai City had Situ Cangyue, the giant group had Dongqing Wudi, and the Samsara Palace had the master of Samsara Palace. Forget about the purgatory of Heaven Capital, at least the Li family still had Li Honghe. Only the Snowdance core could be completely affected by Li Tianlan's will and not be shaken at all. Once Wang Tianzong broke through, even if he didn't do it himself, with the influence of the chosen one in the world, he would let the Beihai core swallow the Snowdance core, which was equivalent to cutting off one of Li Tianlan's arms. In such a matter, it was obvious that Li Huaqing did not give Li Tianlan the support he wanted. Even with Wang Tianzong's breakthrough, the attitude of the academics seemed to have changed. It was hard to say now. Tribulation stopped, looked at Li Tianlan, and said, "Tell me your plan." "I want to go north of Sai City," Li Tianlan said without hesitation. Li Tianlan spoke without hesitation. His tone was short, but it carried a touch of absolute sharpness, like an unsheathed sword stained with blood. "Go north." Tribulation raised his eyebrows. Sai City was in the northernmost part of Zhongzhou State. If they continued north, they would reach Eastern Europe. "Go north." Li Tianlan nodded. This was the first time that he had made a suggestion on the future development of Sai City since he became the young governor of Sai City. Perhaps from this moment on he had officially integrated into the role of one of the core figures of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan with some seriousness. It was the first time that he had made such a suggestion. Sai City must pay full attention to it. Otherwise, what kind of young governor was Li Tianlan? He sat opposite Li Tianlan and said seriously, "Tell me what you think." "The only force I can think of is Sai City. Only Sai City can completely stabilize the 5 countries in Eastern Europe." Li Tianlan said slowly, "We can't afford to lose the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. They are our most important foundation and bargaining chips in the future. To be honest, I'm afraid." He was really a little afraid. He was afraid of losing everything, of feeling ashamed of the Li family, and of not being able to bear the responsibility he was now carrying. He was afraid of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong, who stood in the position of the chosen one, put unparalleled pressure on him. With the addition of the Wang family of Beihai, the sense of oppression even made him dare not breathe. Under such circumstances, there was Jiang Shangyu, who was secretive in the Snowdance Corps. According to the current intelligence from Zhongzhou State and Samsara Palace, Jiang Shangyu was likely to have established contact with the Wang family of Beihai. This was normal. Otherwise, he should not have fallen out with Kunlun City in any case. However, in this way, the Wang family of Beihai had put another powerful figure in the Snowdance Corps, and he was much more powerful than Qin Qingwan. So Li Tianlan felt that tribulation was not enough here. He wanted to put the whole Sai city in the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. There were several famous assassins in the dark world in Sai city. Their almost peak-level assassination ability could be a deterrent both inside and outside the city. Sidu Zhangyue, Tribulation, and Qin Shilai were 3 invincible realm experts. When the situation in Wulan State was completely stable, the 3 of them would unite to open up the passage from Wulan State to Western Europe. The Dark Knights would also exert their strength to show the dark power of Northern Europe and cooperate with the Snowdance Corps. At that time, Raphael would be added, which was equivalent to another invincible realm expert. The Qin clan and Rekvia were deeply rooted. Li Tianlan held Rieker in his hand. In this way, Li Tianlan could be completely relieved. With such a force, as long as Wang Tianzong did not take action personally, Sai City could completely cope with the pressure brought by the Wang family of Beihai. It's useless for you to only tell me about this. Tribulation thought for a while and said slowly, I will talk to Auntie in detail tonight. Li Tianlan nodded. In addition, I will also communicate with Minister Dongqing and Secretary Bai. Sai City's overall move to the north involved many aspects. At least, the interests in the northeast could not be given up in vain. Now Sai City seemed to have given up everything in Guangdong and Longjiang province, but they were in charge of Liaodong, and their influence in the entire northeast was unparalleled. Sai City left the northeast, and all the things were complicated. Some interests could not be given away in vain. For the Dongqing clan, Li Tianlan was one of their own. For Sai City, Li Tianlan was also one of their own. But for the Dongqing clan and Sai City, they were just allies. Li Tianlan had to coordinate all the relationships. Only when both sides had a satisfactory answer could Sai City move. Tribulation nodded and said, I personally have no opinion. Then I'll implement it as soon as possible. Li Tianlan stood up. Tribulation nodded and said, I'll arrange a car to take you back. No need. Li Tianlan shook his head. It's windy and rainy. I'm just sober. He walked out of the door and looked at Tribulation. Tribulation stood where he was, his eyes gentle and indifferent. In a trance, Li Tianlan could not remember what this martial uncle looked like when he first met him. But he knew that Tribulation should not be like this. He should be the strongest assassin in the dark world, not the commander stationed in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan's mouth moved and he whispered, Martial uncle, thank you. Tribulation smiled and shook his head. There was no sharpness, no coldness, only calmness. Li Tianlan turned and walked into the wind and rain, feeling complicated. Under the general trend, everyone's fate would change more or less. Now the old general trend had not fallen, and the new general trend was about to change. No one could see clearly what would happen after Wang Tianzong broke through. What Li Tianlan could do was to use the resources he had now to create a relatively favorable situation for himself. He walked quietly in the wind and rain. The wind and rain fell and evaporated silently when they were about to fall on him. All kinds of thoughts began to emerge in his mind. Some were bold, some were unrealistic, some seemed possible, some were pessimistic, and some were depressed. Li Tianlan let his thoughts spread. Walking in the wind and rain, he seemed more and more ethereal. The night completely enveloped the world. There seemed to be a light in front. There were some faint noises. A familiar and almost unforgettable fragrance drifted over, faint and faint. Li Tianlan sniffed subconsciously and raised his head in surprise. Qin Weibai was standing in front of him with a smile. Beside her, Flaming Fire was holding an umbrella, expressionless and emotionless. Li Tianlan was a little surprised, but before he had time to speak, an incomparably cheerful and cordial emotion suddenly came over. Colorful rays of light formed in front of him and enveloped his entire body. Li Tianlan's back sank slightly. It was as if a heavy sword had fallen on his back. The feeling was heavy but broad. Li Tianlan didn't feel tired at all. It was a feeling that was almost connected by blood. He and the sword seemed to be a whole. In other words, the sword seemed to be a part of his body. It was so harmonious and harmonious. The colorful light that enveloped him gradually converged and turned into an imperceptible halo. Standing in the halo, Li Tianlan looked calm and quiet, but there was a kind of transcendent elegance about him. Li Tianlan subconsciously reached out his hand. His palm touched a part of the sword hilt. The black hilt looked deep and profound. He finally saw what the sword looked like, even though he only saw a part of the hilt. "This is?" he asked softly, a little confused. "It likes you very much." Qin Weibai smiled softly and said, "This is the sword I mentioned. It can be worthy of your future, the sword that really belongs to the chosen one." Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. He could feel the vastness and purity of this sword. The Haoran sword intent that was enough to tear the sky had no trace, but it was extremely powerful. With this sword in hand, even if Li Tianlan didn't enter the invincible realm, he could be called invincible. If this sword cooperated with him, with his sword intent and the abundant sword energy of this sword, he could completely reproduce the glory on the night of the trial day, or even more powerful. In other words, with this sword in Li Tianlan's hand, as long as Wang Tianzong didn't break through, he could fight with Wang Tianzong. Or even fight to the death. Li Tianlan felt the meekness and joy from behind, thinking, "Is this an opportunity? The sword in the square is a little too much." Li Tianlan thought about something and said subconsciously, "No." Qin Weibai blinked and said softly, "You deserve everything it gives you. Its master must be the real invincible chosen one and should also be a god in everyone's heart." Strong wind and heavy rain. She seemed to be a little cold and gently wrapped the gray windbreaker around her. Li Tianlan glanced at her. Gray windbreaker, white scarf, white shirt, black straight pants, and high heels. Simple, with a coolness that did not match the weather in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan took off his marshal's uniform and put it on her. He took the opportunity to hold her body in his arms, bit her pink ear, and whispered, "Thank you. I like this sword very much." The invisible giant sword behind him became more and more excited. Qin Weibai's body was trembling slightly, and she murmured, "Itchy." Li Tianlan kissed her ear again. Qin Weibai let out a soft hum, and her delicate body became softer and softer. She subconsciously wanted to get into his arms. Li Tianlan smiled, suppressed the charming thoughts in his heart, and whispered, "You're not leaving this time, are you?" Qin Weibai was silent in his arms for a while, and whispered, Tomorrow I'm going to Mormon's." Li Tianlan frowned. As if afraid that he would be angry, Qin Weibai put her arms around his neck and whispered, "I'll accompany you tonight. You can do whatever you want." After a pause, her perfect and flawless face blushed, but she was still cold. She said in a soft voice, "As many times as you want." Li Tianlan's breathing suddenly quickened, and his hand holding Qin Weibai also slightly tightened. "Boss, it's time to go up. The palace master is still waiting for you." Flaming Fire suddenly said. Her voice was extremely cold, like the frozen ice in the polar region. Li Tianlan glanced at Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire was also looking at him. There was a strange glint in her eyes. "Yes, let's go and find my sister." Qin Weibai gently pushed Li Tianlan and said softly, "The palace master is here?" Li Tianlan was stunned. Since he entered the secular world, the Samsara Palace had been closely related to him. He had met many high-level supermasters of the Samsara Palace, and the one who had been in touch with him was Qin Weibai. But he had only seen the master of the Samsara Palace once in a video. If she was in Eastern Europe, this would be the first time Li Tianlan met her. Li Tianlan felt a little complicated. "It's in a nearby hotel. Let's go." Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan into a black car on the side of the road. Li Tianlan glanced at the Manlisai Hotel in front of him through the window and did not speak. Qin Weibai sat next to him and held his hand in an extremely gentle manner. "The clothes don't suit you very well." Li Tianlan suddenly said, "They look old." As soon as the words came out, he was stunned. In his mind, Qin Weibai had always been truly flawless. There was no such thing as fitting clothes. Any clothes she wore were a real scenery. In all fairness, Qin Weibai could still be said to be devastatingly beautiful in a gray windbreaker. But this color made her look too mature. Li Tianlan always felt that it was a little strange. He didn't even know why he was so harsh on her. Really? Qin Weibai looked down at her clothes and whispered, "Then I won't wear it anymore." She took off the windbreaker and put it on the seat. She hesitated and leaned into Li Tianlan's arms. "It looks much better this way." Li Tianlan lowered his head and praised. Qin Weibai looked at where his eyes fell and gently rolled her eyes at him. She pursed her lips and said with a smile, "You're so annoying." Li Tianlan wrapped his arms around her waist and whispered, "What's the matter with Mormons?" "Just some small things. It'll be solved soon." Qin Weibai leaned into his arms and felt his heartbeat. Her eyes were a little dazed and she whispered, "When Mormons' matter is solved, I'll go to Tiannan with you, okay? I'll leave Samsara Palace and stay with you all day. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I can give birth to a child for you." And Rushi and Yue. Her bright eyes gradually became blurred and full of longing. Li Tianlan's expression also softened and he whispered, "Okay, when it's over, I'll take you to Tiannan." He paused and whispered, "It'll be over soon." The colorful flowing light gradually flowed behind him and flowed to his arm. It gradually slid down and covered his whole palm. The light gradually condensed and finally turned into a pair of black gloves on Li Tianlan's palm. The corners of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he felt a little helpless. His palm was gradually moving up and was about to touch the warm and proud peaks, but there was a glove on his palm. The glove was really thick. Li Tianlan looked at the glove thoughtfully. It seemed to feel Li Tianlan's mood. The light on the glove flickered with some grievance, and then it turned into a black ring again. Li Tianlan stroked his palm with satisfaction and said with a smile, "What's the name of this sword?" Qin Weibai's body slightly stiffened, and she subconsciously glanced at Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire drove the car attentively, holding the steering wheel tightly. Qin Weibai moved her body and whispered, "It doesn't matter what it was called before. Now it's your sword, and it's better for you to give it a name." Flaming Fire, who was driving, suddenly said, "Does a name mean anything?" Li Tianlan looked at her in surprise and said, "What do you mean?" Flaming Fire was silent for a while, and then said indifferently, "It means nothing." She drove the car and said no more. A long time ago, when she first followed Qin Weibai, she realized a truth. But it was not until today that she completely understood it. The so-called name, the so-called identity. Yours, mine, hers, and its. No matter what the name was. It was meaningless. Chapter 558. The three-star hotel where the master of Samsara Palace stayed was not big. The only advantage was that it was close to the Manlasai Hotel, so it was very convenient to travel. After parking the car in front of the extremely exquisite hotel, Flaming Fire finally said, "Here we are." "You're not getting off?" Li Tianlan asked. "I still have something to do." Flaming Fire sat motionless in the car and said calmly. Subconsciously, Li Tianlan felt a little strange, but for a moment, he could not tell what was wrong. Before he could figure it out, Qin Weibai had already gently held his hand. Li Tianlan smiled, got out of the car, and walked into the hotel with Qin Weibai. When they were about to enter the door, he looked back. Flaming Fire's black car was approaching a crossroads ahead. Li Tianlan was deep in thought. In the end, he followed Qin Weibai into the hotel. The top floor, the only luxurious suite. The mysterious master of Samsara Palace lived here. For Li Tianlan, it was hard for him to describe the position of the master of Samsara Palace in his heart. It was a kind of estrangement that he had never really met, but there was a closeness between them. There was also gratitude as if he had been reborn, and some vague respect. All the emotions gathered together and became extremely complicated. Samsara Palace Master, Qin Weibai, and even the 12 Supermasters. Everyone had done a lot for him. There were some things that Li Tianlan already knew, some he didn't know, and some he had already noticed. It seemed that since he entered the secular world, the Samsara Palace, which had been mysterious and low-key, had actually been revolving around him. There was Qin Weibai's deep love for him, and naturally, there was also the laissez-faire attitude of the master of Samsara Palace when she was silent. This favor was so heavy that Li Tianlan even felt a little scared and ashamed to accept it. The elevator was going up slowly. Li Tianlan carefully tidied up his clothes and suppressed all the thoughts in his mind. He could feel the extremely strong heartbeat in his body. The huge vitality of the immortality potion was still working. This immortality came from the master of Samsara Palace. A dark green jade pendant on his neck trembled slightly as the elevator went up. That was the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld, which also came from the master of Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan's thoughts became more and more complicated. Qin Weibai had rushed to his side like a moth to a flame, and then the whole Samsara Palace had spared no effort to support him. Would there be an answer to all of this today? The elevator stopped, and the metal doors parted. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and led Qin Weibai out of the elevator. The door to the luxurious suite was open, and it was quiet inside. Qin Weibai stood in front of the door and knocked. "Come in." A calm and wooden voice rang out in the room. Qin Weibai walked in first and pulled Li Tianlan to the living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room were huge. In his line of sight, a tall and plump figure was sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, quietly watching the scenery outside. There was no TV on in the living room, no lights, no air conditioner, no tea, and no paintings. There was only the woman sitting in front of the window and the wind and rain outside. In the past. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. For a long time, this place seemed to have been deathly silent and dull. Qin Weibai lightened her steps and said softly, "Sister, Tianlan is here." Li Tianlan stared blankly at the black figure in his sight, bowed slightly and said, "Greetings, Palace Master." Qin Weibai quietly pinched Li Tianlan, her eyes filled with hidden bitterness. Li Tianlan was stunned for a moment before he realized that he had said something wrong. He coughed and said with slight embarrassment, "Sister?" The master of Samsara Palace turned her head and glanced at him. There was darkness between them, but their eyes were extremely bright. Qin Weibai walked aside and turned on the light in the living room. The master of Samsara Palace's expression was calm. She nodded slightly and said, "Sit down." Li Tianlan sat down and didn't know what to say for a moment. "You have something on your mind." The master of Samsara Palace suddenly said softly. Li Tianlan glanced at her and was a little stunned. Although she was a little plump, the outline of her face was extremely soft, and he could vaguely see the delicacy she used to have. Li Tianlan didn't even dare to guess the age of such a master of Samsara Palace. It was possible that she was 30, 40, or 50. He scratched his head and said with a smile, "I'm a little nervous seeing you for the first time." "It's not this." The master of Samsara Palace looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said softly. Her eyes were so light that Li Tianlan couldn't see any emotion at all. It seemed that all emotions were merged together, and the strongest was calmness. "You have something on your mind." She repeated her words. Qin Weibai brought a cup of tea to Li Tianlan and sat beside him. She looked at him strangely. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, then shook his head and said, "It's a small matter." The chosen one in the dark world is not a small matter. The master of Samsara Palace said softly in a self-mocking voice. Li Tianlan's hand holding the teacup trembled slightly. He raised his head and said, "You know all about it?" The master of Samsara Palace sat by the French window and said softly with a faint sense of loss in her voice, "I've been waiting for this day for a long time." She looked at Li Tianlan and asked, "Are you afraid?" Li Tianlan answered simply, but he was thinking about the words of the master of Samsara Palace. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. The master of Samsara Palace suddenly raised her hand. Li Tianlan's fingers loosened slightly. A colorful light lit up in the palm of the master of Samsara Palace. "I'm not surprised that Wang Tianzong will break through. But now it seems that this is not something you should face. I will block the Sword Emperor in this state for you. So, don't be afraid and don't worry about anything." The master of Samsara Palace said calmly, "I want to borrow this sword." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said softly, "That's the chosen one." "I told you that my sister also has a sword," Qin Weibai suddenly said. "She has been preparing for this sword for a long time. Although it is only the power of one sword, it can reproduce the peak state of the chosen one. No matter how much preparation a person at the peak of the invincible realm prepares, he can't reach this level." Li Tianlan said quietly. "So this sword is the key." The master of Samsara Palace said quietly, "This is the sword of the chosen one. Its owner used to be the chosen one, so this sword naturally has the sword intent and sword energy of the chosen one. I will arrange for people to form a sword formation created by the chosen one and urge the remaining sword intent of this sword to the extreme." "This is not enough," Li Tianlan said. "If this sword has the power of the chosen one when it is urged to the extreme, then the so-called chosen one is too worthless." "It's not enough, but it's not far from it." The master of Samsara Palace looked at him and said, "I will make up for the lack. It's enough for me to exchange all my martial arts for one sword." "One person for one sword." Li Tianlan suddenly stood up and said, "No." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 559. To some extent, before Wang Tianzong officially broke through, Li Tianlan could be said to be the person who knew the combat power of the chosen one best. His sword intent was already in the most perfect state. Simulating the sword energy with sword intent, he could totally imagine how powerful the chosen one's sword was. Because of this, he was so scared when facing Wang Tianzong, who was about to break through. The suffocating pressure was like a shadow covering the whole sky. There was no light, only the deepest darkness and majesty. In this state, Wang Tianzong's every move made him extremely nervous. Li Tianlan had long known that the master of Samsara Palace had a sword move. That was the strongest trump card of the Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan had also estimated the power of this sword move, and the conclusion was very clear. The power of this sword move should be roughly between the peak of the invincible realm and the half-step supreme master. Only in this way could the whole dark world be afraid. But he did not expect that he still underestimated this sword move. The strongest trump card of the master of Samsara Palace was the chosen one's sword move. And it was the chosen one who was in the peak state. The power of this sword move had almost exceeded the limit of Li Tianlan's imagination. No matter how amazing the power of the void divine weapon emitting colorful light was, no matter how amazing the sword formation created by the chosen one was, the master of Samsara Palace had to pay a price for this sword move. Putting Wang Tianzong aside, you certainly can't bear this sword move. Li Tianlan looked into the eyes of the master of Samsara Palace and said seriously. The master of Samsara Palace was also looking at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were calm and tranquil. After a long time, a faint smile bloomed on her soft face. "You care about me?" I said. "You can't bear this sword move." Li Tianlan did not know why he suddenly became extremely agitated. He could not tell where this feeling came from, but the instinct that was close to intuition kept reminding him that he could not let the master of Samsara Palace use this sword move. Otherwise, he was likely to regret it for the rest of his life. The increasingly clear intuition was almost roaring non-stop, occupying all of Li Tianlan's consciousness. His heart was beating wildly, and the worry and fear in his subconscious completely surged out, so much so that he forgot to respect the master of Samsara Palace. "I can't bear it, neither can Wang Tianzong." The master of Samsara Palace looked at Li Tianlan and said in a soft voice, "There are many results after this sword move. The best result is that Wang Tianzong and I die together. The worst result is that I die and Wang Tianzong is seriously injured. But even the worst result is good enough for you." Her voice was steady and soft. In fact, Li Tianlan was wrong. He was not the only one who knew about the heavenly suns. In other words, in this era where no one had ever seen a heavenly sun, only the master of Samsara Palace had seen the power that could change the color of heaven and earth. She might not know Wang Tianzong, but it didn't matter. Wang Tianzong could definitely break through. It didn't matter. because in any case he firmly believed that the chosen one she met could not be stronger than Wang Tianzong after the breakthrough. But after the breakthrough, Wang Tianzong could not be stronger than the real chosen one she had met. The two sides were evenly matched. She was confident that she could truly replicate that pinnacle sword. Therefore, whether the result was the best or the worst, it was actually not bad. She did not care about life and death. What did it matter to her? This is not what I want, Li Tianlan said. He suddenly felt a little powerless. He was very clear about the consequences of all this. Everything was in the open. If he became the chosen one, there was no way for him to let anyone replicate his sword unscathed. The chosen one represented absolute majesty, absolute supremacy, and absolute supremacy. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Dominance over others. How could such a sword be replicated? Even with so many conditions, the master of Samsara Palace had to pay the price. But this is what you want, Qin Weibai said softly. The emotions in her eyes changed, and the crystal light was like the twinkling starry sky. Why? Li Tianlan asked. Qin Weibai wanted to say something. Li Tianlan suddenly glanced at her and shook his head. He looked straight at the master of Samsara Palace and asked, Why? It has something to do with you, and it has nothing to do with you. The master of Samsara Palace laughed softly. Her eyes became softer, but with a little stubbornness and sadness. The biggest reason is that I want to give myself an ending. Do you like this ending? Li Tianlan sneered, but panic and coldness kept spreading in his body. His breathing was a little shaky. You still don't understand. It's not a matter of whether I like it or not, but the ending should be like this. My fate is like this. The master of Samsara Palace said softly. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He was grateful to the master of Samsara Palace and respected her. But to put it bluntly, they were not familiar with each other. Today was the first time they met officially. He did not know why his emotions were so violent. He closed his eyes. After a long time, he said coldly, I don't believe in destiny. There seemed to be some emotions in the master of Samsara Palace's soft eyes for a moment, and they became dazed and desperate. The room fell silent for a moment. Li Tianlan forced himself to calm down. After a while, he said softly, I need to know the reason why the Samsara Palace desperately fought against Wang Tianzong. You just said that people in high positions can't talk about life and death easily. I did say that. The master of Samsara Palace said softly, but if there is no Samsara Palace, I will naturally not be in a high position. The Samsara Palace has actually done everything it can do by existing to this day. Next, there is no need for it to exist. When things in Eastern Europe are over, Little Bai will go back to Tiannan with you. All the preparations have been made there. It will be your real sky. With Little Bai helping you, I can rest assured. Li Tianlan frowned and looked at the master of Samsara Palace in silence. The chaos in Eastern Europe was caused by the Samsara Palace, so I have always been able to grasp the general direction of the chaos. Tianlan, now you have done everything you should do. Wang Tianzong's breakthrough is not what you should care about. The final battle is also not your business. All grievances will be settled in the final battle. As for the future, it will be a new era. Isn't that good? No matter how good the era is, if you can't see it, what's the point for you? Li Tianlan said coldly. I don't deserve to see the era that is too good. The master of Samsara Palace smiled brightly, but a little sadly. So you are going to die? Li Tianlan looked at the master of Samsara Palace and laughed at himself. And you are going to die for me? What's the reason? The master of Samsara Palace was silent for a while, then slowly said, The reason? Just take it that I owe you and pay you back. You don't owe me anything. All the negative emotions in Li Tianlan's heart broke out completely, and his voice was cold. Before today, you were just a name I heard from others. We didn't even meet. What can you owe me? Do you still remember Dongqing Huangtu? The master of Samsara Palace suddenly asked. Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. Of course, he remembered Dongqing Huangtu. In fact, out of some curiosity, he had been looking for clues about Dongqing Huangtu, but all the clues he got pointed to one problem. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. I remember, he said, but this person doesn't exist at all, and he shouldn't exist. If he really doesn't exist, how can there be you? The master of Samsara Palace's voice was fleeting, but in Li Tianlan's ears, it was like a clap of thunder. Li Tianlan's face suddenly turned pale. He gritted his teeth and said, "What do you mean?" "Nothing." The master of Samsara Palace said softly, "It's just that for me, what has existed can't be denied. He is the chosen one, so he naturally existed." Li Tianlan subconsciously glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai had been silent. Her perfect and delicate face seemed to be transparent in the light. He remembered that Qin Weibai had talked about Dongqing Huangtu for the first time that day. He was besieged by several invincible realm experts, interfered by countless thundershocking realm experts, and drowned by murderous weapons and a sea of people at the same time. Corpses were everywhere, and blood flowed like a river. He was besieged to death by 6 invincible realm experts? Li Tianlan asked. To be exact, there were 3 murderous weapons and 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm. One of them could barely be regarded as the chosen one, but his state was damaged. The master of Samsara Palace said. Even Li Tianlan, who thought he knew the chosen one very well, was speechless for a long time at this time. 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Not to mention that one of them was a chosen one in an incomplete state. Even if there were only 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm, they could sweep everything in this era. Now in the whole dark world, there were no more than 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm that could be confirmed. Not to mention 3 murderous weapons and a sea of people. The most important thing was that he still remembered what Qin Weibai had said. In such a siege, Dongqing Huangtu died in a sneak attack. At that time, he still hadn't used his sword. That was a sneak attack from the woman he loved deeply and also loved deeply. If it hadn't been for that sword, the final result would be hard to say. Every time he heard about it, Li Tianlan felt nothing but shock in his heart. Dongqing Huangtu, is he really dead? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Of course he is dead. The master of Samsara Palace sighed softly. Li Tianlan nodded and said, "What does this have to do with me? I can't pay back what I owe him, but I can't watch you continue to struggle in this era. There are some things that are the same to pay back to you." The master of Samsara Palace said blandly, "What do you owe him?" Li Tianlan was suddenly a little curious. If the master of Samsara Palace was paying back a debt, why would she pay it back to him? A debt that could make a peak of the invincible realm pay with his life? One could imagine how heavy it was. The master of Samsara Palace didn't say anything. Li Tianlan glanced at her and said, "What does Dongqing Huangtu have to do with me?" The master of Samsara Palace still didn't say anything. Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai had calmed down. At this time, she was blinking at him with an innocent face. It was obvious that she didn't know. Li Tianlan thought about it and simply changed the angle. The existence of Dongqing Huangtu was too vague. The clues he had were not enough to directly find out the person who seemed to have a close relationship with him. So he asked directly, "Who killed Dongqing Huangtu back then?" The master of Samsara Palace was silent. It was a long, long time. In the almost frozen time, she finally looked up at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were calm, but her voice seemed to pass through a desert invisibly, becoming extremely hoarse and dry. "It was me." The master of Samsara Palace said, "I killed him." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 560. The candlelight flickered in the darkness. This was an almost spacious hall. The dim light of the candlelight flickered slightly. Where the light converged, a brand new statue of God stood there, bathed in the subtle light, looking at the surrounding darkness with a face full of pity. An old man in a white robe knelt in front of the statue and prayed devoutly. The darkness was deep, the candlelight was weak, and the prayers were silent. The whole hall seemed to have been completely frozen. The windows in the hall were open. The clear but extremely strange sound of waves came over, with the sound of countless pieces of ice colliding with each other. The ice wind in the depths of the Arctic Ocean whistled into the hall. The candlelight began to tremble, and the light and shadows in the hall were constantly turbulent. The whole hall seemed to be filled with an uneasy aura. The statue of God was still compassionate. The old man was still silent. Mellad looked at the old man in front of the statue. His expression was calm, but his heart was beating faster and faster. Another gust of cold wind whistled past, piercingly cold like a knife. The curtains in the hall were blown up. In the shrill sound of the wind, the candlelight in the hall began to spread. The faint flames seemed to be burning out of thin air. Bits of light were scattered in every corner of the hall, extremely soft. The old man opened his eyes, and his voice was strangely soft and low. The eyes of God are watching here, and the light is about to come. He raised his hand slightly. The candlelight in the whole hall burned more and more vigorously. The dim yellow light brought by countless remaining candles gradually turned white, so pure that it was almost dazzling. But these are all fake. Mellad looked at the old man in front of him and said calmly, "What God created is naturally true." The old man said with a smile. Mellad's body tensed up, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. In the entire Vatican, only one person was qualified to wear a white robe, and only one person was qualified to wear a white dress. The latter was the Holy Virgin, and the former was the Pope. Only the Pope. No one could have imagined that after they had no choice but to withdraw from Reiki City, the Vatican, which was already badly battered, did not take advantage of the situation to withdraw from Eastern Europe. Instead, the Pope came in person. Obviously, the Pope was not willing to give up the interests of Eastern Europe. "Who the hell are you?" The Pope walked casually in the vast hall, and his tone was also careless. "Mellad, I need an explanation for all this. If there are no accidents, after Eastern Europe, you will have many choices, such as continuing to stay in the Holy Disarmament Corps. I will give you more autonomy. I even want you to go to the Knights Templar to be the new Grand Knight Commander, or stay in Eastern Europe and be the spokesman of the Vatican in Eastern Europe." The Pope's tone was indifferent. "I've thought of many possibilities, and they're all about you. I dared to use you, but I didn't expect you to give me such a big surprise." He paused for a moment before continuing, "Who are you?" "Your Highness the Pope, does it really matter who I am? More importantly, I saved Eris's life." Mellad said quietly. On the night of the trial day, he had saved Arsis in the most impossible situation, and his hidden strength had also been completely exposed. This news could not be hidden at all. However, Mellad had finally brought Arsis back to the secret base of the Vatican. For him, the exposure of his identity was no longer a big deal. The most important thing was that with the exposure of his identity, some plans that had been quietly changed had to be carried out by him. For example, convincing the Pope. In fact, if you hadn't hidden your strength and joined forces with Arsis, the situation might not have been like this. The Pope said with a pleasant expression, "You betrayed the glory of God and brought great losses to the Vatican." But Mellad was silent for a while, then shook his head with a wry smile. "Betrayal is a sin," the Pope said slowly, "but God is merciful. He will forgive your sin and allow you to enter the kingdom of God. Go repent, Mellad." In the flickering candlelight, he snapped his fingers. An incomparably huge sense of crisis suddenly permeated. If this chapter is not over, please turn the page. The bottom of the abyss enveloped Mellad. Deadly danger came at him from all directions. He subconsciously began to step back. "Ah, ah, ah, ah." A roar that was close to madness suddenly cut through the night sky. The entire palace shook violently from the roar. All the light in the hall shattered in an instant. Mellad suddenly opened his eyes. The Pope was standing not far from him. The flickering candlelight was still there, but it was much smaller. He had already knelt in front of the statue of God, holding a steel knife in his hand, and had already cut open the skin on his chest. Blood flowed down. Mellad only needed to put in a little more strength, and he could pierce his heart with his own hands. In an instant, Mellad broke out in a cold sweat. After the trial day, Mellad and Arsis immediately entered the secret base of the Vatican in Reiki City. The Pope prayed at the first opportunity. This time, the prayer was not for an hour or a day, but for a few days and nights. Even when the other members of the Vatican officially left Reiki City, the Pope did not move. The prayer continued until just now. After the prayer, the Pope was not weak. Instead, his essence, chi, and spirit had completely reached the peak. In his spiritual domain, as long as he wanted, Mellad would be in danger at every step, and he would not even have the ability to fight back. Was this the transcendent realm? Mellad's breathing was rapid. The fear of walking on the edge of life and death turned into extreme anger in an instant. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the Pope. He said in a fierce voice, "Your Majesty the Pope, you want to kill me? How dare you kill me? It's you who needs to repent." The Pope's voice was gentle and calm. "Okay, repent. Use my own life?" Mellad laughed loudly. "How about now? I'm still alive. You can't kill me. This is God's will." The Pope said slowly, "God has given you life. You should thank God." Mellad stared at the Pope. Sweat and blood continuously flowed from his body. The Pope looked at Mellad quietly, his eyes deep and bottomless. After an unknown period of time, Mellad took a deep breath, stretched out his hand, and drew a cross in front of his chest. The Pope smiled with satisfaction. "I like your attitude now." He poured himself a glass of water and took a sip. God created all things. In front of the great glory, everyone must remain in awe. He poured another glass of water and handed it to Mellad. "So, who on earth are you?" Mellad looked at the glass of water and did not dare to take it for a moment. In the Pope's spiritual domain, even though he was an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, he did not dare to be sure of his current state, let alone believe his own perception. In his sight, he saw the water that the Pope handed over, but who knew what it was? He took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and said, "It doesn't matter who I am. I want to know your identity." "You refuse to answer. That's arrogance," the Pope said in a gentle tone. Arrogance was a sin. Mellad hesitated for a moment and said slowly, "I'm a follower." The Pope's body suddenly stiffened for a moment. The candlelight around him also seemed to be slightly shaking. "Follower?" His tone was a little surprised. "Whose follower?" "Of course, His Majesty's follower." Mellad said calmly, "Your Majesty the Pope, I came back this time and brought back His Highness Arsus to show our sincerity. Our Majesty wants to cooperate with the Vatican and conspire with the overall situation of Eastern Europe." "Your Majesty? Your Majesty?" The Pope repeated twice and took a deep look at Mellad. "Which Majesty?" "The Duke of the Dark World. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." There were only two recognized majesties: Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong and the Pope. Now, the majesty behind Mellad was obviously not Wang Tianzong. "I don't know," the follower replied in a calm tone. The Pope narrowed his eyes and suddenly smiled. "Can I understand it this way? You betrayed the Vatican, and the majesty who made you betray the Vatican is your real master. You don't even know who he is?" "It doesn't matter," Mellad said calmly. "I don't care what his identity is, but he can give me what I want." "What do you want?" the Pope suddenly asked seriously. Mellad smiled self-deprecatingly. "The Vatican can't give me what I want." The Pope fell silent. "I don't trust such cooperation." The Pope was silent for a long time before he said calmly, "But I don't mind you telling me what I can get by cooperating with His Majesty. What you can get depends on what you want and what you are willing to pay." Mellad said meaningfully. The Pope smiled and said calmly, "Before I have a complete plan, I'm not willing to pay anything. But you can try to persuade me with your life." The meaning of these words couldn't be more obvious. Mellad was in the Pope's territory and could only be controlled by the Pope. If the cooperation today failed, Mellad naturally couldn't live. Mellad thought about it seriously and said calmly, "His Majesty can give you the theocracy that the Vatican has always wanted." He said calmly, "The theocracy of the whole of Eastern Europe, the Eastern Church, has been destroyed. The faith of all the people in Snow Country and even the 5 countries in Eastern Europe can be given to you. Given? The Pope laughed. His laughter was extremely cold. How arrogant. In this world, except for the great God, no one is qualified to give me anything. Then let's change the words. Mellad said casually, deal. His Majesty can give you the theocracy that you want the most. The Pope leaned against the sofa and said slowly, why does His Majesty think that he can give me these things? He looked at Mellad and said meaningfully, the 5 countries in Eastern Europe are Li Tianlan's world. Up until now, no one can deny this. Mellad nodded. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe do belong to Li Tianlan. But sometimes, in sensitive times, the direction of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe is decided by Xianxia state. Xianxia state, the Pope muttered to himself thoughtfully. As for Snow Country, the Vatican's roots in Snow Country are not shallow. When the general situation is settled, His Majesty will naturally help from behind and let the entire Vatican be unimpeded in Snow Country. Mellad continued. The Pope looked at Mellad, and his eyes became calmer and calmer. Mellad hesitated for a moment and said slowly, Your Majesty, if you agree to cooperate with us, we can show enough sincerity now. Sincerity? The Pope gently raised the corner of his mouth. For example? The Polar Ground Alliance. Mellad said calmly, if you are willing, the entire Polar Ground Alliance will be our sincerity to the Vatican. The Pope's body suddenly shook for a moment. If you are willing, maybe we should change places now. Mellad said lightly. But the Pope narrowed his eyes and finally became serious. Mormons. The Pope lowered his head and thought for a long time. Then he slowly said, if we can cooperate, what do you want? In the darkness, Mellad laughed and made threatening gestures. He looked at the Pope and calmly put forward his request. We want the Knights Templars. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 561. The Polar Ground Alliance collapsed with a bang. But this super dark force, which used to dominate Eastern Europe and could be called the most bloated organization, still had unimaginable interests within it, even today, after 2 of the 4 major families in Eastern Europe were destroyed and the other 2 changed their positions. As the saying goes, a centipede dies, but it doesn't fall down. Today, the general framework of the Polar Ground Alliance still existed, and its internal structure was chaotic. However, from another perspective, as long as there were experts to sort things out, there would still be countless useful people in the Polar Ground Alliance. The remaining Polar Ground Alliance, as the sincerity of cooperation between the mysterious His Majesty and the Vatican, was indeed a big deal. But the other party's big deal also meant a big appetite. It was just as Mellad had said. We want the Knights Templars. The Pope looked at Mellad quietly and was silent for a long time. The other party's big deal was beyond imagination, and the other party's request was also outrageous. After a long time, the Pope slowly opened his mouth and wondered, Are you crazy? His Majesty said that we are worth it. Mellad said calmly, Think about Eastern Europe at this time. You don't need to worry about the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. His Majesty will put pressure on Li Tianlan in Xianxia state. You just want the religious power of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. As long as His Majesty gives enough pressure, Li Tianlan, who is eager to develop his own core power, can only compromise. In addition to the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, if the Polar Ground Alliance is used by the Vatican's chances of winning will also be extremely great. The faith of the whole of Eastern Europe belongs to the Vatican. In contrast, how is a Knights Templars not worth it? It's worth it indeed. The Pope said lightly, but why should I believe that you can give me the Polar Ground Alliance? Nothing is taken for free. Mellad paused and a very strange light flashed in his eyes. If the Vatican wants to get the Polar Ground Alliance, it needs to do something. For example? The Pope asked with great interest. The current Polar Ground Alliance, with the destruction of the Violet and Morton families, the Qin clan and Rekvia's change of position, is extremely chaotic internally, but in fact, Snow Country has occupied a great advantage, and everyone can see this. The Pope nodded. There were almost no powerful countries in Eastern Europe. Snow Country could be said to be the only top international hegemon country in Eastern Europe. They occupied the world's largest territory. They were tough, greedy, and aggressive. The strong desire to fight seemed to be engraved in their bones and blood. Great changes had taken place in the four great families, and the Polar Ground Alliance had collapsed. The higher-ups and important figures of the Polar Ground Alliance had already regarded Snow Country as their best place to rely on. At present, the reason why the Polar Ground Alliance was so chaotic was that with the great changes of the four great families, they were splitting internally. Today, most of the power of the Polar Ground Alliance had fallen to Snow Country, but within them, the supporters of more than a dozen other countries also occupied a certain proportion. The most important thing was that the Qin clan and Rekvia had united and won a considerable part of the power within the Polar Ground Alliance. Now this power could be said to be the biggest stumbling block for Snow Country to control the Polar Ground Alliance, and this power undoubtedly belonged to Xianxia state at this time. The Pope glanced at Mel-lad and asked, "So, you have the confidence to persuade Snow Country? Or convince Xianxia state?" He thought about it, shook his head and continued, "Is it Snow Country? Li Tianlan would definitely not let go of the power of the Polar Ground Alliance that belonged to Xianxia state. In this way, the biggest possibility was that the mysterious His Majesty had the confidence to persuade Snow Country. In fact, His Majesty has already persuaded Snow Country." Melad's body gradually relaxed. "Now the whole Snow Country, His Majesty is waiting for me to persuade you." He looked at the Pope and said meaningfully, "The cooperation is right in front of us, and it only needs you to reach out once. This chapter is not over, please turn the page." The eyebrows of the Pope slightly raised as he slowly said, "Before this, we already had the intention to cooperate with them. From the current situation, we are the only choice of the Snow Empire. Since that is the case, why should I rely on you to cooperate with the Snow Empire?" What he said was completely true. Nowadays, the whole of Eastern Europe was in a state of insecurity. The situation was just like East Island more than 3 years ago, or even more serious than East Island. As the strongest country in Eastern Europe, Snow Country had to make a choice and invite a force that could stabilize the situation of the Dark World in Eastern Europe to Snow Country. At the same time, it could stabilize its position and also contend against the pressure brought by Xianxia state. Nowadays, looking at all the major forces in the world, only the Vatican met this standard. And relatively speaking, the Vatican didn't want much. What they wanted was faith. At least for the time being, there was no conflict of interest. If the two sides cooperated, they could rest assured of each other in the short term. "You said it before." "That was before." Mel-lad explained patiently, "The president of Snow Country was born in the Violet family, and the Violet family has a close relationship with the Eastern Church. Is the intention to cooperate at that time really credible?" Well, even if it is credible, at that time, His Highness Arsis was still in his peak state. As for now, he shrugged. "It's a pity." The Pope's eyes were slightly cold. "So you deliberately let Arsis be seriously injured, but then saved him?" Mel-lad was silent. He didn't mind exposing his identity, but he had to sit back and watch Arsis be seriously injured. He couldn't explain this kind of thing. "But even so, we are still the only choice of Snow Country." The Pope said indifferently, "Compared with any force that Snow Country can invite, we want even less." "You still don't understand. What Snow Country really wants to invite is not some force, but experts. With the foundation of the Snow Empire, they only lack experts. It's just that most of the experts today have their own standpoint, so they want to invite other forces. No matter how you look at it, the current Vatican is not the best choice for the Snow Empire. The best choice for the Snow Empire is us, because compared to the Vatican, our strength has not formed yet, and we want less." The Pope's eyes slightly narrowed. What Snow Country needed now was indeed experts. If an Invincible Realm expert who was close to the peak of the Invincible Realm but had no clear position joined Snow Country would probably give him the most luxurious treatment at all costs. In that case, they didn't need to invite other forces. To say the least, Mellad, whose own force had not been formed yet, and His Majesty behind him were much better than the Vatican. As long as Snow Country paid the price, the mysterious His Majesty's force would develop in Snow Country in the future, and it would be the local force of Snow Country. Regardless of His Majesty's strength, Mellad alone was enough to stabilize the current situation of Snow Country. But now His Majesty wanted to use Snow Country to exchange for Knights Templars. Obviously, compared with Snow Country, whose strength was intertwined and entangled, His Majesty, whose own foundation was insufficient, didn't want to be involved in the current cooperation and future game with Snow Country. He didn't have the confidence to participate, but the Vatican had the confidence. The weight of Knights Templars they wanted was naturally not as great as that of the whole Snow Country. But Knights Templars was a relatively young force in the Dark World. Its organization was simple, and its core was clear at a glance. Besides, it had Mellad's qualifications in the Holy Disarmament Corps. Knights Templars was undoubtedly the best to control. Even if its scale was a little small, its potential was endless. If Knights Templars were in his hands, it would be a real sea and sky for His Majesty. The Pope thought of His Majesty's conclusion. "We are worthy of each other." Finally, he nodded. "Get ready. Let's go to Mormon's." Mellad's face bloomed with joy and a bright smile. He gave a somewhat exaggerated salute and said, "I'll arrange it right away." Your Majesty the Pope. He placed a small bottle in his hand in front of the Pope. "What's this?" "Teaching. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." The Emperor raised his eyebrows slightly. "A small gift, a very magical medicine." Mellad smiled and said, "His Highness Arasus's injury is very serious. But if the Vatican wants to completely control the Polar Ground Alliance, I'm afraid there will be a conflict with the power of Zhongzhou State. His Highness Arasus's power is very important. This medicine can't make him return to his peak state, but within about 12 hours after taking the medicine, it can make him recover at least half of his combat capability. The only drawback is that the period of weakness is very long, very long. Your Majesty the Pope can use it at your discretion." "Give it to me." An incomparably deep voice suddenly sounded behind Mellad. The Pope and Mellad turned their heads at the same time. In the dark corner of the hall, an incomparably burly figure walked over. His figure was steady, but as he moved forward, the candlelight in the room began to shake slightly. The cold wind blew in, but it was melted by the aura of this figure. The temperature of the entire hall seemed to be rising. The cold wind seemed to be burning, turning into an angry flame. Arsis. Ever since he had been rescued by Mellad, Arsis had been in a coma. He had only just woken up. The roar just now had imperceptibly interrupted the Pope's spiritual domain, which could be considered to have saved Mellad's life. Mellad bowed slightly. Arsis didn't say a word. His eyes were fixed on the bottle of potion that Mellad had put down. His body swayed as he took a step forward and reached for it. In his sight, the bottle of potion suddenly began to shine. Countless pure rays of light gathered together and turned into a silver cross. Arsis subconsciously withdrew his hand and looked at the Pope. "It's not the time yet." The Pope waved his hand, and the potion turned into a cross again. Arasus's face was distorted. Endless fury almost completely drowned his reason. "I'm going to kill them. I must kill them all." He bellowed word by word. He was one of the strongest people standing at the peak of the Dark World. An expert at the peak of the invincible realm. As the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, he had never been as embarrassed as he had been on the trial day. As one of the most qualified figures to decide the battle situation on the trial day, in such an important battlefield, his role was infinitely close to zero. All his dignity and pride seemed to have been completely shattered in that battle. Arasus's eyes trembled a little, and he almost lost his mind. Mellad lowered his head and suddenly said, "Your Highness, instead of thinking about revenge, we might as well study why such a situation happened that night." His eyes looked at the shimmer floating under his feet and he said blandly, "You've been crowned by His Majesty the Pope. How could you be hypnotized by a mere patriarch in Eastern Europe? Isn't that strange?" Arsis was stunned for a moment. He slowly turned his head and looked at Mellad, his eyes bloodshot. It's very simple. Someone destroyed your state of coronation. Mellad said calmly, and the means are extremely brilliant. Such a person knows the coronation very well, and he is also a master in the spiritual field. Arcis suddenly let out a roar. Mellad stopped talking. The Pope sighed deeply and was a little disappointed. He had already known who the so-called traitor was. He was a master in the spiritual field, and he knew the coronation and could get close to Arcis. There were only 2 of them in the world. The Pope was not in Eastern Europe that day, and it was impossible for him to destroy the coronation. So there was only one candidate left. The Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Angel. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 562. It was completely quiet in the hall. Just like the depressing atmosphere before a storm, Arcis suddenly became incomparably quiet. The Pope was quiet and silent, like a statue. Mellad stared at the glimmer on the floor, as if he was lost in thought. Arcis stood there motionless, as if he was stunned. After an unknown period of time, the Pope glanced at Mellad with a deep look in his eyes. Mellad didn't say much, but he said a lot. He didn't try to sow discord. But after telling the truth without batting an eyelid, the Vatican, especially the Pope, had to do something. That was the truth. The coronation of the Pope could greatly improve the will of the person being crowned. In such a state, Arcis's will would be extremely focused from beginning to end. In the case of absolute focus, his reaction, speed, and even strength would be slightly improved. Correspondingly, the physical strength that Arcis needed to consume would be reduced correspondingly. In general, the coronation of the Pope was enough to improve Arcis's combat effectiveness to an obvious level. And such a coronation would also not be affected by any spiritual interference from the outside world. On the night of the trial day, it was impossible for Arcis to be hypnotized. But the impossible had become a reality. Naturally, there was only one reason. That was, there was a traitor within the Vatican. Angel. The dignified Holy Virgin of the Vatican, whose status was second only to the Pope, had betrayed the Vatican. Even the Pope's heart was extremely heavy in the face of this news. He was still hesitating about how to deal with this matter, but Mellad had already told the truth. Although he didn't mention Angel, Arcis wasn't stupid. How could he not guess who the traitor was? In this way, the Pope had to take action. Go and ask Angel to come over. The Pope was silent for a while and said with some tiredness, I want to see him. At this moment, Mellad, who no longer belonged to the Vatican, glanced at Arcis. Arcis stood there, expressionless. He did not say a word and was extremely quiet. Mellad shrugged and said, I'll go now. He slowly turned around and left the hall. The Pope squinted at his back and did not speak for a long time. This was a secret base set up by the Vatican outside Recce City. To be exact, it was a hidden church built on a beach in the mountains. Its area was limited, so the building did not look magnificent, but its momentum was extremely magnificent. At this time, the Pope lived in the largest hall in the church. As the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, Angel, who had too many choices, only chose a small prayer room. A faint light was burning in the prayer room, and the cross was flickering. Angel, dressed in a white dress, knelt in front of the cross, quiet and holy. When the roar that represented the awakening sounded, Angel had just finished his prayer. She opened her eyes, but her body did not move. She only quietly experienced the rage and hatred contained in that roar. His Highness Arcis is awake. A strange voice rang out behind Angel. The voice was very soft, but it was extremely cold. It was extremely uncomfortable to listen to it. A slender figure shrouded in a black robe walked to the candlelight from the darkness. Intentionally or unintentionally, she blocked the door to the prayer room. Angel stood up, her posture elegant. Her voice was calm and calm. In that case, His Highness the Pope should have made up his mind. The figure in the black robe was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "Yes." She paused and continued, "In our opinion, His Majesty has made up his mind. Angel smiled and turned her head. Behind the white veil, her eyes were bright and clear. Just because you're here? As long as I'm here, Your Highness, you can't leave. This is the will of the Pope. To some extent, this is also the attitude of His Highness the Pope. The figure in the black robe said softly. You're wrong, Rhea. Angel sighed faintly. This is the secret base of the Vatican. At least the surrounding area is within His Majesty's spiritual domain. He can sense everything here. Without his permission, it's impossible for me to leave, and I can't escape. He sent you here to monitor me to test the attitude of the other higher-ups of the Vatican. So far, I think he has received enough feedback, and it's time to make up his mind. Rhea, dressed in black, trembled slightly. Angel looked at her and said softly, So you're not as important as you think. Rhea, the chief high priest of the Holy Punishment Priests. In terms of duty, she was Angel's right-hand woman, but in fact, she could be considered the most powerful candidate in the Holy Punishment Priests to keep the Holy Lady in check. The Pope had sent her to keep an eye on Angel. This task had excited Rhea for a long time. She even fantasized about the possibility of becoming the next Holy Lady of the Vatican. But only now did she know that the Pope's spiritual domain could cover this place. Thinking of some of her actions in the past few days, for some reason, her face was a little pale. Angel did not continue. She just turned to look at the cross in front of her and said softly, Tell me, which one is more important, the Holy Lady of the Vatican or the Saint War Angel? Rhea did not answer. She did not need to answer anything. The Holy Lady was second only to the Pope, so her importance was naturally greater than the Saint War Angel. But this was only on the surface. Within the Vatican, the Holy Lady represented faith. The Saint War Angel, on the other hand, represented real combat power. In fact, which one was more important depended on the situation of the Vatican at the time and the will of the Pope. Rhea gritted her teeth and said respectfully, His Highness the Pope is fair. Fair? Angel nodded. Oh, fair. You did something wrong, and you must be punished. Rhea's voice was sinister. Obviously, she was saying that the question of which was more important was meaningless. The most important thing was that Angel had destroyed Erisis's coronation state, directly causing Erisis's serious injury and the Vatican's failure. Such a mistake was the most important. I didn't think it would be like this either. Angel sighed softly. Her tone was extremely complicated. It seemed like she was telling Rhea, but also explaining to the Pope. This was the first time Angel had explained since the trial day. Although the Pope was not in front of her, he was in his spiritual domain. Angel believed that he could hear everything here. But in a trance, there seemed to be another voice, extremely far away. Then Rhea's voice came. Unexpected? What were you thinking at the time, Your Highness? It's meaningless to talk about it. Angel smiled self-deprecatingly. Even from our current standpoint, it's no good for us to fall out with Li Tianlong. His Majesty and Arsis both saw the huge benefits of Europe after Rothschild lost its leader. Such benefits could even make them give up Eastern Europe. But in fact, with the relationship between Rothschild and the Wang family of Beihai, even if Wang Tianzong didn't show up that day, would Li Tianlong really dare to kill them? To say the least, even if Paul and King Tong died, Li Tianlong and Zhongzhou state would not be willing to make a wedding dress for the Vatican. If Arsis succeeded that night, Li Tianlong would definitely fall out with him as soon as possible. At that time, it would be a problem whether the Vatican could go out of Eastern Europe or not. This problem had been mentioned on the night of the trial day. But it was not recognized by the Pope and Arsis. That was why she secretly took action and destroyed Erisis's coronation state. At that time, she just wanted to prevent Arsis from completely killing Paul and King Tong. In her plan, after severely injuring Rothschild, she would first stabilize Li Tianlong. The two sides would conspire to Eastern Europe and then attack Rothschild. However, she really didn't expect what would happen next. Arsis, who was not in the coronation state, would actually be hypnotized. In the end, she would achieve nothing and the Vatican would also suffer a crushing defeat. This was really the worst result. Even if she fell out with Li Tianlong that night, it would probably be the same. I'm afraid it's more than that, isn't it? Melad's voice suddenly sounded from outside the door. I think the main reason is that your highness doesn't want to be enemies with Xianxia state. Your past is there, and so is your deep love. It's in a certain assassin. If you have a choice, you will definitely not fall out with Xianxia state and even destroy His Highness Erisis's coronation state. Is that right? Angel suddenly turned around. Under the gauze, her eyes fell on Melad's face with anger. Melad was slightly stunned, then he shrugged his shoulders. He bowed and said with a smile, Your Highness, His Majesty the Pope invites you in. Angel's body trembled slightly. After a long silence, she slowly said, Let's go. Rhea made way for him. Angel walked out of the prayer room and walked to the hall. It was dark ahead. In the darkness, no one could tell whether the danger of fire or frost began to spread gradually and occupied her whole consciousness. The church was getting closer and closer. Melad, who could be considered to have officially separated from the Vatican, finally stopped. He looked at Angel's back with a complicated look in his eyes. In his sight, the fluttering white dress was completely swallowed up by the darkness in the hall. Angel's face was still calm. He glanced at Arcis and then bowed slightly to the Pope. The Pope looked at him in silence. In the almost frozen darkness, the flickering light of the candlelight gradually expanded. The Pope's voice sounded, Angel, you did wrong. Angel was silent for a while. I'm willing to take responsibility and, whoosh! The ice wind by the sea whistled in with the wind and rain. A huge figure suddenly appeared beside Angel. With a crisp sound, Angel's delicate body flew out directly. A smear of blood and teeth fell to the ground. The veil fluttered and fell in the darkness. Boom! The whole hall shook with a loud bang. Angel's body hit the pillar of the hall and slowly slid down. Under the white veil, the beautiful face of the Holy Virgin Angel was a little blurred in the darkness. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. It was a shocking sight. Take responsibility. Erisis's furious roar echoed throughout the hall. How can you take responsibility? What right do you have to take responsibility? Can you afford to take responsibility for such a serious loss of the Vatican? You dirty and lowly woman. When I knew that you were not a virgin, I should have persuaded His Majesty to purify you. Arcis stared at Angel and smiled viciously. It's not too late now. Go to hell, bitch. The candlelight spread again. All of Erisis's roars were drowned in the candlelight. Outside the hall, Melad slowly turned around and walked in the other direction. He climbed a hillside around the church and looked at the waves in the darkness. The wind and rain fell, and all the sounds became extremely messy. Melad took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. The call was quickly answered. Is it done? The mysterious His Majesty's voice sounded on the phone. Angel has gone to see the Pope. Melad said respectfully, From now on, there should be no Holy Virgin in the Vatican. The mysterious His Majesty smiled and said, Oh, how will the Pope deal with Angel? It depends on the intentions of all the higher-ups of the Vatican. But if there are no accidents, the Vatican will purify her, Melad said in a low voice. After all, he had stayed in the Vatican for many years. When it came to purification, his tone was a little unnatural. Purification. This was the cruelest criminal law within the Vatican, and it was a criminal law that had never been used in recent years. It was usually used to deal with heresy that had caused great losses to the Vatican. The Vatican would first inject an extremely precious drug into the person who was being purified. This drug would not have any direct increase in combat power, but it could make the injected person's spirit unprecedentedly concentrated, and his spirit was absolutely concentrated. This also meant that the other party would always be awake, and his body would become extremely sensitive to external pain. Then the saint warriors would tie the other party to the cross, light the fire, and burn the body. The purified heresy would always be in the most sober state and would be burned alive when his perception was extremely sensitive. This was purification. His Majesty was silent for a while, then clicked his tongue and said, It's really cruel. The dignity of God cannot be offended, Melad said subconsciously. He shook his head self-deprecatingly and said softly, "Your Majesty, I don't understand why you are targeting Her Highness Angel. If I hadn't exposed her tonight, the Pope might not have made up his mind to purify Angel." "You can't bear it?" His Majesty's voice was a little playful. Mellad shook his head. "No, it's just..." He gave a wry smile and didn't say anything in the end. "I'm not targeting her. In fact, if I ascend to the peak of the Dark World in the future, the Vatican will definitely be one of my most troublesome opponents. From this point of view, it's actually not a bad thing for Angel to control the Holy Punishment Priest group. She's a very kind woman, and it can even be said that she's simple. She deserves the title of Holy Virgin. I have a good impression of her. With her existence, we will have less trouble in the future. After all, with her character, she won't cultivate too many troublesome fanatics." His Majesty's tone was a little emotional. "But these are all things that need to be considered in the future. Now, how can I care about the future? I must solve the trouble in front of me. It's very troublesome and also very important." "What trouble?" Mellad said subconsciously. "Tell me, if Li Tianlan leaves Eastern Europe, who is the most qualified to take over Li Tianlan's position?" His Majesty suddenly asked. Mellad was silent for a moment subconsciously. His Majesty had already given the answer. "It can only be tribulation. Don't underestimate tribulation. In Eastern Europe, not only me, but everyone else can't do anything. Jiang Shangyu can't beat him either. Sometimes, his deterrent power is no less than that of the peak of the invincible realm. He has to die. Only when he dies can everyone feel at ease. If Angel is purified, it's impossible for tribulation to remain indifferent." Mellad said, "So to purify Angel, you want to get rid of tribulation with the help of the Vatican? I told you, didn't I? As I said, I have a grudge with Arsis. But in order to cooperate with the Vatican, I can only let you save his life. He saved his life, but it doesn't mean that he can live. I used the knife of the Vatican to get rid of tribulation, and I also used the sharp edge of tribulation to get rid of Arsis. Since we can cooperate with the Vatican, it's time for Arsis to die." His Majesty said calmly. "This?" Mellad hesitated for a moment. "Can tribulation kill Arsis?" Tribulation had a very high evaluation in the Dark World. He was the only assassin of the invincible realm in the Dark World. But on the divine and holy list, his evaluation was not high, and he didn't even enter the divine list. Arsis, on the other hand, was a real expert at the peak of the invincible realm. Even if he was seriously injured, tribulation should not be his match. What's more, he had just left Arsis a bottle of potion that could temporarily restore most of his combat capability. I said, "Don't underestimate tribulation." His Majesty's voice was a little distant. "At present, it only depends on whether he knows how to let go." "All right." Mellad smiled bitterly. "If tribulation is really lucky enough to kill Arsis, what about our cooperation with the Vatican?" "What cooperation?" His Majesty's voice was full of innocence. Mellad suddenly felt that the ice wind between heaven and earth was really cold, cold to the bone. Conspiring with the overall situation of Eastern Europe is something that the Vatican and other superpowers are interested in. What does it have to do with me? His Majesty chuckled. Look at the current Samsara Palace. They cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital for the benefit of the chaos in Eastern Europe. We cooperate with the Vatican for the benefit as well. But the so-called benefit is, after all, just something said. Except for those who are persuaded, no one will care. Mellad suddenly couldn't laugh anymore. Samsara Palace, he murmured to himself. What Samsara Palace wants is a new era. She doesn't care about the benefit of Eastern Europe. It doesn't matter who she gives it to. His Majesty said. What about you? Mellad asked. Me. His Majesty laughed. Why don't you understand? What I really want is Knights Templar. Now he had more than one invincible realm expert around him. But strictly speaking, the relationship between the two sides was not the kind of relationship that could be completely trusted. His Majesty had no so-called foundation or heritage, so what he really wanted was a foundation that could allow him to develop. There was such a foundation in Eastern Europe, but he couldn't take away the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. He couldn't take Snow Country. As for the territories outside Snow Country and the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, they were also entangled. In contrast, in the whole Dark World, only Knights Templar was the simplest. But the organization of Knights Templar was also the most streamlined and comprehensive. As a vassal agency of the Vatican, most of the complicated internal entanglements were concentrated in the Vatican. The internal environment of Knights Templar could be said to be the simplest force. Such a foundation was what His Majesty needed the most. So he cooperated with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He cooperated with Wang Qinglei. Jiang Shangyu entered Eastern Europe. Some of these collaborations had been implemented, and some had not been implemented. But it didn't matter, because even if these were just cooperation intentions, they could become bargaining chips in his hands. He used these bargaining chips to persuade Snow Country. Then Mellad exposed his strength and persuaded the Vatican. Snow Country cooperated with the Vatican, and His Majesty would also cooperate with the Vatican. In this way, the Vatican got Snow Country and the broken but still bloated Polar Ground Alliance. But His Majesty got the entire Knights Templar. Mellad suddenly felt that something was wrong. The cooperation this time was simple and vague. Snow Country paid most of the power of the Polar Ground Alliance for this. And the Vatican paid Knights Templar for this. Then what did His Majesty pay? His Majesty finally, it seemed that he paid some saliva? And it was Mellad who paid the saliva to persuade the Vatican. He held his mobile phone and was silent for a long time. Then he said seriously, "Your Majesty, does this count as getting something for nothing? You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.